No. You've got to listen to the way people talk. You don't say affirmative or some shit like that. You say no problemo. And if someone comes up with an attitude, you say eat me. And if you really want to shine them on it, hasta la vista, baby. Hasta la vista, baby.
Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys.
I'm Liam, this is Rob, and this week we are once again joined by Terminator superfan Dan Goldsworthy for what has to be amongst the greatest sequels of all time, and undoubtedly one of the defining movies of the 90s. A few weeks ago, we covered Jurassic Park and discussed how that movie moved the industry forward leaps and bounds in a way that has sadly been all too rare in the decade since its release. Well, James Cameron's Terminator 2 did much the same in 1991, and while there might not be any dinosaurs, of course, it did have a T-1000 made out of a metic polyalloy, or to us layman's, liquid metal. Like Jurassic Park, though, it is managed to end like a fine wine thanks to its inspired combination of mostly physical effects and relatively sporadic use of what was, at the time at least, cutting-edge CG, I suppose. So I don't know about you guys, but I, for one, find it very hard to believe that this movie was made more than 30 years ago, which makes me feel old as dirt. But it certainly holds up.
The problem that we have is all these films now are making us feel old as dirt. Like, it's insane. Like, we're watching these films that we grew up with and it's fantastic. And then somebody says, oh yeah, by the way, it's nearly 40 years old. You go, fuck off. No, it's nearly 40 years old. Can I say something? I love this film. I will not shit a lot on this film, but your introduction makes me, when I watched this film last night, I fucking hate John Connor in this film.
Really?
He's a whiny bitch, dude. I don't like a whiny bitch.
Oh my God, I have a completely different read on that. So I'm going to go to Dan as the third party because I think Ed Furlong is absolutely brilliant in this movie.
Oh, he's good at being a whiny bitch. He's brilliant at being a whiny bitch.
I don't know. I buy it. Like, for what is he, 12 years old? I think he ticks every box. For somebody, considering that they found this kid in like a playground ostensibly, which is maybe one of the only things that ages this film. You just can't imagine that happening in 2022, can you? Some like movie producer coming up to a kid in a playground. Hey kid, you want to be in the movies? Even you would be arrested fucking immediately.
Even his motorbike whined. Like that chase scene against the truck when Robert Patrick is chasing down the thing and you've got his motorbike going, I'm trying. Oh my God. Sorry, Dan. Cut in.
So, well, typically, this is the case. If you guys disagree, and this is going to be really boring here, I always am bang slap in the middle of you. If you guys agree, I agree. If you disagree, I'm in the middle. I think Ed Furlong in this movie is good, but he's kind of like Bart Simpson, isn't he? Like he's got that eat my shorts, whiny, nasal, voiced by a sort of not quite, kid gone through puberty voice. And it reminds me a little bit also of Luke in the first Star Wars, where once you notice that he whines, you notice that he whines. And as long as you haven't picked up on that fact, it doesn't actually really bother you too much. But I will agree that he does whine a lot through it. But loads of kid actors are rubbish, especially if they've not got any training or what have you. And I certainly don't think his performance in it worsens the movie anyway.
Oh no, I will totally agree.
He's a whiny kid, like kids might be at that time.
I will totally agree. He's a great actor. He's doing fantastic in this. I mean, it's probably just that he has to be a whiny bitch in this film, and it just
it's weird. I don't think you give him enough credit for the fact that he's 12 years old, because you've got to buy him as being like vulnerable. He's got to be cool in this movie, and that is one of the things that's I think underrated in his performance, is that for a 12-year-old kid, he is actually quite cool. Like he's the way he dresses. I think he is like dude, if you met most 12-year-old kids by definition aren't cool.
I will go on record and say no, I don't hang around with 12-year-old kids. Okay?
no, that's fair enough.
I haven't met a lot of 12-year-old kids, okay?
I mean more like on screen. I can't think of many young kids on film where you're like, oh, that kid's cool. And like I said, I don't think he totally pulls off, because he is kind of lame, because again, he's 12 years old. But for the most part, it's like, I believe him when he being quite tough for his age. He's resourceful. I totally buy him as that. Even as and it's one of the things which, again, you notice more with the sequels. It's that I buy the idea that he would grow up to be a future leader in the way that I totally didn't buy, like, say, Nick Stahl in Terminator 3. Like, you just never bought into the idea that he was going to be this great leader of men, despite the fact that he was already an adult.
I do get that. And his serious tones, I think he delivered perfectly, right? But it's just when he started whining, it's Edward Furlong's voice as well that grates. When he starts whining, it grates. The dad in me, though, really wanted to take him for a haircut. Like he kept fucking moving that one bang out of his eyes constantly. I just wanted to take him for a haircut. Dude.
Well, this is a
It
time.
was the 90s,
Sorry.
though. I was going to say it was the 90s.
Yeah,
though.
I know.
It's. I mean, my hair was way lamer than that, even 5 years later. So I don't think it's that bad. You might look at it and go, "That's not the coolest hair."
Although his friend, what was his friend's name? Tim. His
Oh,
mullet game was
the
on
ginger
point.
mullet kid. Yeah.
His mullet game was on point, and ginger mullet as well.
See, you're saying that like you prefer to have the ginger mullet over John Connor's kind of like floppy fringe.
Well,
which, let's be clear,
You want to
looks
go
like
cool? You want to go cool, right? Ginger mullet and was it a denim vest?
It's a big statement. But no, it was the time clearly of fringes, because one of the things I'd never noticed before is just how goddamn long Sarah Connor's fringe is.
Yes.
It's so long. It goes down to her nose. And I don't know, maybe she pulls it off because she's just such a badass in this movie, but her fringe is outrageously long. So it was clearly a thing going on in 1991, long floppy fringes.
Watching this film as well, you say about Sarah Connor, it really shocked me. I don't know why. When the doctor turned around and says, next patient is a 29-year-old female. I was like, fuck, Sarah Connor is 29. Then I realized I've grown up with her being 29 when I was like 11. Then I bypassed her. Now, she's always been 29 in this film. But for some reason, for me, 29 seems young.
No, do you know how old she was when she actually made this? So now you brought it up.
I'll find out. But...
Well, the thing is, I mean, whatever you say about it, I'm actually surprised myself when you say that. I assumed she was a bit older, but again, we take it for granted now, but in terms of like a cinematic transformation, I don't think there's been a greater cinematic transformation and reintroduction than Sarah Connor. Like when we left her, she had the ridiculous 80s hair. She worked in the shop, and obviously she was very much the kind of like, obviously she had a moment at the end when you got that hint of the badass that she would become with the "you're terminated, fucker," that kind of last line. But then that introduction when, you've got the doctors walking down the corridor and she turns around and she is fucking shredded. She's like, "Hello, Dr. Silverman. How's the knee?" And she's like talking through her eyebrows like a proper psycho. And immediately you just like, you buy her as a badass in that moment. 100%.
I think
wouldn't have been... Sorry, Dan. She wouldn't have been far off. She was 34, 35 when she filmed this.
That's what she looks to me. She looks like a proper grown-up. Sorry, Dan.
I was going to say, she's that, in terms of a physique that fits the character, she, like you say, she absolutely nails it. I mean, in terms of cinematic transformations, I'd probably say Christian Bale's between The Machinist and like The Dark Knight, where he put on 7 billion pounds of muscle. I mean, different characters and all that. But the thing is, having watched Terminator 2 first as a kid, I can't remember the point when I'd have gone back and watched the first one and gone, oh my, she just looks like a soft, just post-teenage, early 20s, normal person. Because in this, like you say, she's shredded, but in that way where you're not exactly getting your protein intake, like every sinew on her body you can see. And I seem to remember reading years ago that she fucking hated the workout regime that she had to do because it was brutal. And you can see, because she's just so, like, she is just so lean. And especially whatever the lighting is on it, you can always see her shoulder definition. And like you say, you almost get that. She's like a baddie in a horror film when she's looking through her eyes like, "Hi, Dr. Silberman, how's the knee?" And like the wet sweat hair is...
That long fringe again. Yeah, it comes into play.
Yeah, it's like kind of, hey, it's from like a thingy from The Shining, almost like, hey, here's Johnny or whatever, through the...
Yeah. Well, you buy her like in that moment. And I guess, again, it's always hard to kind of judge, like looking back, because we all watch this as kids and you watch it in a different way when you're like 10 years old, 11 years old. But if you were coming to this for the first time, and of course, you've just gone from Sarah Connor being this kind of like, kind of everyday girl next door thing. And then you see her there looking through her eyebrows like a real kind of psycho. And she's in the kind of, for lack of a better term, loony bin, I suppose. And it's just like, oh, has she legitimately gone insane kind of thing in that moment? But yeah, like whether the fact that she looks like she belongs there, you totally buy into it. But in terms of like removing the need for narrative, like you don't need to have an exposition dump about Sarah Connor's life for the last 5-10 years, because you can see it all over her face and body. It's like, oh, I know what's happened, and you don't need that up on screen. Sorry.
How old is John Connor in this film? Did you say Edward?
12.
12. Is John Connor 12?
Yeah, 12. Yeah,
sure.
I think so. Yeah.
So Sarah Connor would have been 17, probably 16 in Terminator 1. That's
what they're kind of alluding to. So yeah, she would, and she wasn't that young. I mean, that's the problem with this film.
But the age of legal consent is 18 in America. So Kyle Reese basically did statutory rape. Is that what we're going with?
I mean, yeah, now that you put it that way. So 29. So she would have had 20. Yeah.
He's 12, as you say. He's
Yeah,
17. But 9 months before that, she could have been theoretically 16.
But she's definitely suspect.
But in T1, she's able to go into nightclubs and stuff. So,
well, that is the thing.
Timeline.
She's clearly, and I don't know what her age is officially supposed to be. This could be another bit of research for someone to do while someone else is talking. But she clearly wasn't 16, 17 in this movie. She was living with a friend. She was away from home.
That's what I mean.
My impression is like the first film, she was like 24, 25. So the whole John Connor thing and her being 29, not only does it not make sense, not only does it look weird, she doesn't look 29, but it's like she's already, like you say, 34, 35-year-old, in real life.
I love it, right?
Why do they feel the need to make it 29 in this movie when it makes no sense?
In a film about time travel, in a film about timelines, we're questioning ages.
I know. Well, it's that thing, though, isn't it? It's like, it's easier to believe the impossible than the improbable. Because just going back to her being in the mental institute, it was only last night that it really dawned on me. Because over the years, I have genuinely not at all tried to think about the circular time loop nature of all this, because it would just, firstly, it makes your head explode, and secondly, it might ruin the film. But I'm at the point now when I've watched this so many times where I don't mind that happening, because it's fun to chat about it, especially to guys such as yourself. And what I realized was that surely John Connor grows up to send Reese and the Terminator back in time to sort of save himself and his mum. Surely at some point he'd have said to Reese, right, my mum turns out to be an absolute fucking nutbag, right? Make sure she doesn't blow up that munitions factory and go on about Judgment Day. Otherwise, she'll end up in the hospital bin. That is really important. Then pass on that your fate isn't what we created it is. And then everything unravels as soon as you realise that.
Oh,
and tell him as well that he's going to die. Reese, just a favour, right? Just a thing. Don't be careful when you go into. Well, I can't even remember how he died now, but just be careful, because she would have told him how he died. I'm sure.
Well, it's so weird. Like, what does he do? Because he knows all the story. It's like, do you tell him? It's like, oh, like, by the way, you're going to die, or like, oh, by the way, just like, don't pull out. Like, one of those. Well, it's pretty important that he does.
Well, maybe it's like, maybe don't commit statutory rape. Like,
that's the thing, though. He wants to make sure he exists. Does he say that, or does he say, make sure you finish inside my mum? It's like, you've got to say one of them. And
well, to be fair,
the latter is much more important to his existence.
It's kind of hinted in future films, isn't it? That John Connor never actually says to Reese, "You're my dad" or anything like that. It's always just like, "You're my favorite soldier" kind of thing. And he kept putting
what a lame leader he is. Dude, you're my favorite soldier.
It's an anonymous Father's Day card.
He kept telling her. He kept telling Carl Reese stories, didn't he, about his mother trying to instigate that thing. So Carl Reese was the guy that goes, right, I'll go back in time. So
I'm just thinking about Dan going up in like a side business on Father's Day cards, just on the front. You're my favorite soldier.
You're my favorite soldier.
And just like a bunch of dads all over the world, just like, what the fuck does that even mean? It's like, oh, you'll get it eventually, dude.
Perfect gift. Not gift. Having the Keanu Reeves thumbs up from Point Breaks a couple of weeks ago, just on top of it, going, "You're my favorite soldier."
Oh, that would really confuse the shit out of people. You're combining movies now. It's like, well, we can only hope that you listen to the rather obscure "Hey You Guys" podcast. Otherwise, this card's going to make zero fucking sense. Jesus, right?
Yeah, we'll do deep cuts, mate, all day.
Yeah. The thing is, I mean, we've got obviously a little bit into the weeds a little bit too quickly. I mean, one of the things I wanted to ask Dan, and you mentioned last time on the podcast when we did the original Terminator film that this one was probably the first movie. Sorry, was probably your favorite of the two. Do you still feel that way, having like rewatched them again both quite recently? Because I appreciate it happens to myself all the time. I'm like, oh, this was my favorite one, and then I go back and watch them, and I haven't seen them for maybe like a decade or something. I'm like, something changes, or a film lands in a different way. But is it still the same order for you, one and then two?
And then a follow-up question to that before you answer that is, did it fuck with your mind watching them before Christmas? Just
of course.
The second one, definitely not. No, it makes Christmas. I feel empty inside if I haven't watched Terminators before Christmas. You know what? Because I didn't feel the need desperately to watch them again before. It's because I feel like I know them well enough to chat about them. But at the same time, a refresher is always good. And having watched Terminator 2 again just last night, I watched it with the idea of, do I really prefer the first one over this one? Or is it something I tell myself? And you know what? I realized last night why I do still prefer the first one. And this is not in any way to knock T2, because it is the movie I would recommend to other people if you said you have to see one. But it's because all my favorite bits from Terminator 2 are the bits that almost ape Terminator 1. All the little things like the sequence that I really like is all the mental hospital stuff, which is all this, and then the T-1000 coming, and that was all the slow slasher, killer, stalker, dark vibes of the first one. Whereas in the second one, it is a bit padded out with certain scenes that either go a little bit too long. Like, for example, when they go to the desert in the middle of the film, that starts to slow down. And I think the pacing in general, and maybe it was because I watched the director's cut, maybe we'll get to that in a bit. It does feel like, because I've seen them so many times, there are a few bits in the film where I go, oh, well, I just check my phone just to see. And I'm not normally a check my phone during watching anything on TV type person. And the first one definitely doesn't have that. Every year, every Christmas, I sit down and I don't think, oh, you know what? I've seen this film 20 times or 30 times, however much, maybe more. Let's just go and see what's on Reddit.
Yeah.
And
so
that is probably my main difference. But I don't know if you've ever noticed the similarities between the first one and the second one, because they're not obviously similar films, but it's more the bits in style of the T2 that ape the vibe of the first one are definitely my favorite bits of the film.
It's definitely the way you have the Terminator stalking through hallways and things like that, and just where it concentrates on his face and there's just no emotion. And Annie said in an interview once about how whoever's gonna be the Terminator has to be an actual machine. So if they're reloading a gun or if they're starting a bike, anything like that, they can't be looking down to see what they're doing, because it has to all be machine-like. And I saw that interview before I watched this film, and then I realized, shit, he's right. Even to the point where he's like reloading the shotgun, he's not looking, or when he does the flip thing with the shotgun, he's not looking at any of that. So the repetition that he's done to actually do these and make it machine-like, and then I realized, my God, that was the same in T1 as well. Just the whole like machine-likeness of it. You realize, fucking hell, he actually put some commitment into this.
Oh, his performance is totally underrated. Like, one of the things I noticed, like speaking to that, is the scene at the Cyberdyne Systems when he's up in the window and he's shooting at all the cops with like a minigun. He does not blink. He does not blink. And he, like, you know, I know it's not a real gun, but I bet you that thing is going off and the dude does not blink. But yeah, like little moments, like the shotgun reload is the coolest reload sequence in cinematic history. I don't care what anyone says. But I thought Dan picked up like two perfect, like absolutely bang on points. One about like parts of this movie almost feeling like a remake. And the intro to this film in particular actually feels like a bit of like big dick energy from James Cameron, especially the future war section, which is so similar to what you see in the first movie. Yeah. But it's hard to believe that it's only 7 years between the two films. When you're seeing that sequence in particular, it's basically saying, look how much money they've given me. Look what I can do in 1991. Because like that sequence in particular, if you put them like side by side, they are night and day. And, you know, it almost looks good enough. You know, if that went up on a cinema screen in 2022, I don't think it would look out of place.
No.
But in terms
it didn't. I mean, we watched the T2 release, what was it, back in 2019 when it came out in the cinema, and it looked perfect. It was 3D at the time as well. It was a 3D release in the cinema. And it looked
well, the
fantastic.
3D release is a really interesting one. Because not only do they add like a few tiny bits of CG, mostly to cover up stuntman work, it's just to kind of put Arnie's face on them. But one of the things it does do in terms of like removing that kind of sign that it's obviously a 90s movie is they tone down that blue hue, which used to permeate the entire movie. But if you're watching that version, it means you're quite often watching, you know, I think we all ended up watching the director's cut. And what that did is brought such a big emphasis on the weakest element of the movie, which Dan mentioned, is the section down in Mexico. It's always been the movie's weak link. Like, I think for like 80-90% of this movie, it's a near perfect movie. Like, it legitimately is. You know, you're talking about 3 of the greatest action sequences of all time. There's hardly any fat on the bone for most of the film. And then you get this weirdly sagging middle section in Mexico, and it slows the movie down to an absolute snail's pace. And if you watch the director's cut, there's actually, from a narrative perspective, a lot of the stuff they say and a lot of the scenes are really important, like, and certainly to explaining the kind of humanization of the Terminator. You know, I'm thinking the sequence when they open up his head, take out the chip and stuff. That stuff is actually... Sorry.
Was that in... I don't remember that from any of the other viewings I've ever seen, but I saw it last night, director's cut. So that's only in the director's cut, yeah? That's
only in the director's cut. And the scene with the smiling and stuff like that. And there are a few other just small kind of dialogue moments, if anything else. But one thing you'll notice is nearly all of them, outside of a few CG shots, they all happen in the desert in Mexico. And you can see they were just like, all right, this is good stuff. but this is slowing the movie down. Like, they are so keen to just get to Cyberdyne. They're like, we've just got to get to Cyberdyne and get this movie on the road again. That sequence, you need it from a narrative perspective, but they shrunk it down as much as possible because he obviously knew, the same as Dan mentioned there, is that this is the bit that slows the movie down.
And you answered that for me then as well. I think you do need that scene, though, especially for John Connor to explain how he grew up and how he thought things were normal, to explain to him why, when he found out why he thought his mother was psycho and things like that. So I do think you still need that scene, though.
Oh, you 100% need it. But like I said, I think some of the dialogue from the director's cut is actually beneficial from a narrative perspective. But he's clearly like looked at that and said, all right, I'm going to keep in the bare minimum. So the stuff you're talking about there, you absolutely have to have in the movie for, I think, the movie to work. But he's cut it right back to be like, all right, we're going to have as little as we can. And then it's back on the road again, both literally and figuratively. And we'll get to Miles Dyson and we can get to another fantastic action sequence. But yeah, to speak to Dan's point, when I'm comparing the two, my initial thought, unlike Dan, is always that I prefer Terminator 2. And, you know, I think the highs of Terminator 2 are higher than anything in Terminator 1. I don't think Terminator 1 quite gets to, you know, some of the chase sequences. And I think maybe it has just happens to have three of the greatest action sequences of all time in one movie. But then Terminator 1, the original, doesn't have that low point. Like, it is absolutely relentless. Like, it's just 90 minutes and it doesn't stop. And as Dan said, like, I don't think I would ever dream of like looking at my watch, you know, checking my phone in Terminator 1. But Terminator 2, if I'm going to the toilet, I know exactly when I'm going. It's in the goddamn desert.
I know we'll talk about it more a little bit later on, but you said about the action sequence of Cyberdyne. Did you notice who the SWAT team commander was as well? I've never noticed.
Dean Norris. Dean
Norris, yeah. He's Hank, isn't he, from Breaking Bad?
Yeah. And in Total Recall, and he was like a bit part character, and basically,
Dean Norris. He wasn't Total Recall, wasn't he? He was the dude with the messed up face.
Yeah,
the mutant. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the guy who worked in the bar, isn't he? Yeah. Dude, that never clicked for me that was him until you just mentioned it. That's insane.
I just really, he's been popping up a lot lately on my screen with all rewatchings and stuff. He just comes out of nowhere. Randomly, he was in like the Tremors TV show.
Of course. Oh, but only Rob knows that. Literally, and when I say only Rob knows that, I mean possibly on planet Earth, that he was on the Tremors TV show. But no, it is, despite its faults, though, and when I say fault, I do mean fault, because I think that's the only issue with this film, is it's still in the conversation for greatest sequel of all time. I mean, you know, it's in that rare kind of air alongside Aliens, which unbelievably is another Cameron film. It's amazing that he did two of the greatest sequels of all time. Certainly two films as well, which changed the tone of the original movie so successfully. In lesser hands, you know, you could really have an issue. But Empire Strikes Back, Godfather Part 2, sorry, Rob, to say this, but Top Gun Maverick, I think now belongs in that kind of category. But yeah, it's unbelievable that he has made two of the greatest sequels of all time. And, you know, and like I said, those changes, because I'm not sure how you feel about the change in tone. I think it's really smart, because it's not like, you know, nowadays you would get the change in tone to make this a PG. It's not a PG. There's violence, there's swearing in this film. But he was like, well, there's no point in just kind of remaking the tech-noir horror of the original film. It's all done with a bit more tongue-in-cheek, despite the violence. And I think that's summed up perfectly in the Arnie getting suited up, you know, when he goes into the bar. It's still violent. As soon as they play,
I was going to say, as soon as they play Bad to the Bone and he does sunglasses flip, you instantly get the tone change, because at that point there, it's still brutal and it's dark and it's like, oh, this guy's like ripping up people. But the second it goes, you go, and he does the little sunglasses flip. Yeah. You realize, you understand that at that point in time, Arnie had he must have been doing, and I've also got on my notes, I don't know if he's necessarily lost 10 pounds of muscle or just got older. His physique is still incredible, but he now doesn't look superhuman. He just looks superhuman. And I think a lot of everything I've just said there is to do with the fact that he was starting to make family movies at the time. And I'm not saying they were going to go for family appeal with this. No. But just overall, I mean, there were complaints about the violence at the time. And it's like, did you not watch the rest of what this was already based on? And I think that it's not a lighthearted movie, but there are lighthearted moments that instantly, like you say, it makes it feel like it could have been a PG, even though there's moments that are most definitely not, like the arm reveal, you know.
That's pure horror.
Brutal. And some of the stabby bits, like the fingers through, basically, like T-1000's fingers through people's faces. They're not kid appropriate stuff. But sorry, I cut you up there, but
no, not
exactly that. I love, right? I'm not letting you get away with it, Liam. I love how you threw in Top Gun Maverick and then just kept talking, so I couldn't say anything. So I'm going back to that. Not the greatest sequel to a not good film, right? Not happening. Secondly, the second one, you're not allowed to bring up Tom Cruise and then not give me a chance to rebuttal. It's not.
Okay,
it's
fair
not
enough.
fair.
Fair enough.
Okay.
No, I'll give you the fact that Top Gun Maverick is so much better than the original, but the original one's fun, but the original film is just okay. It's a fun film, but it's not a fantastic film. So it was a completely different challenge. So maybe it's not kind of fair. But I do think Top Gun Maverick is a fantastic sequel. Like, jokes aside, I don't think it belongs in quite the same category as your Godfather Part 2.
Top Gun Maverick just needed to not be a vanity project for Tom Cruise. We're never going to get away from it. Tom Cruise is a prick. But right, okay.
I don't know what to say.
When you talked about Bad to the Bone, then I had a question about when he took the gun off the bartender.
Mm-hmm.
Was it already for like that wasn't even the bartender's bike, that was the other guy's bike, but there was a perfect spot for that gun to just go on the back of the bike? Do you notice that there was already just a perfect spot to put it? Like, yeah. Is that for all biker?
Well, I mean, maybe in this biker gang, they all look like they were ready to fight. They all look like they had weapons and stuff. So again, this is the Point Break sandwich issue again, where you just keep picking up like the strangest things to have an issue with.
So I'm not going to go strange issue. I'm actually going to go something that I picked up that I really enjoy about this film is the first opening 25 minutes, especially the introduction of the two time travelers. Because if you're watching this film fresh and you've already seen Terminator 1, you instinctively believe that the smaller person is the good guy, Robert Patrick.
Well, they dress him like a cop as well.
That's what I mean.
Reason to believe
instinctively, like there's no hint that he's a Terminator. There's nothing like that. All right, he knocks out the guy, but the way he does it is human-like. He's knocked out the guy.
Yeah, they do that trick, don't they, at the start? Because obviously we know, based on what happens afterwards, that when he kills the cop, that he clearly sticks his arm through him and kills him. But when you see it for the first time, if you didn't know anything about it, you could just believe that he's just punching him and stealing his clothes.
Same as Michael Biehn from the first one. And that's what I love about this, is that there was no, and I gotta believe, I can't really remember trailers or anything back in the day, but I gotta believe it was never hinted that Arnie was the good guy in this film.
Well, no, it's clearly set up as a reveal because it goes all the way through to that really crummy hallway at the back of the mall. It's a surprising place to do such an awesome action sequence.
Really weak,
you have it right the way down
as well. Really weak walls on that hallway.
Really weak walls, yeah. But all the way to that moment when he's got the box of flowers and it goes into slow motion, and you assume that the T-1000 is very much your Michael Biehn character. I mean, he does look like Michael Biehn, and it's only in that moment that you're like, oh no, Arnie's the good guy. And I wonder how many people in the world that worked for, because obviously it's hard for us to judge, because I don't know about you guys. So I already knew Arnie was the good guy by the time I watched Terminator 2. So I'm
wondering if there was any build up to it, or I can't remember any trailers for anything like that, any marketing. But
no,
any build up?
I don't think it had anything like that, because it was one of the first films to have like a kind of classic teaser trailer, but it was just basically a close-up of Arnie's face, which was like half kind of like they used it on some of the promotional stuff, like half Terminator, half kind of human. So I don't think there was any hint that necessarily he was the good guy. So I think a lot of people went in just assuming, oh, Arnie, it's another Terminator, they've got to save him from the kid. But it's an absolutely inspired choice to turn the tables, as it were. And again, speaking to the difference in tone between the two films, similar to Alien and Aliens, I think we mentioned like the similarities on the last Terminator podcast we did, that the first film was just pure horror. But then the second film, to bring in like not only a motherly relationship, but what ends up being like, you could have read that imagine reading that on paper. You've just watched Terminator 1, this tech noir kind of, horror movie, and you're seeing the script for the second movie, and you're like, wait a minute, you're going to play off the Terminator as a father figure? Like, what the fuck? And it just kind of goes to show like just how good James Cameron is, that relationship absolutely works. Like, and I'm jumping to the end here, but that final sequence when they have to lower him down into the steel, and he does a thumbs up out, that should be dog shit. It should be dog shit. But instead, the whole cinema bursts into tears. It's unbelievable that works. Are
you assuming the whole cinema bursts into tears, mind? Or you just like?
Dude, I'd be amazed.
They're all as much of a pussy as you. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, dude, my wife keeps telling me I'm like dead inside because she's never seen me cry. But like in terms of like having like an emotional impact on dude, surely like the Terminator being dropped down into the steel is up there with like your Shawshank Redemptions, your Green Miles, Toy Story 3, perhaps the opening of, I don't know, any Pixar movie recently.
Never seen Toy Story 3. I couldn't tell you.
You've never seen? Oh, dude, the end of Toy Story 3. Jesus Christ, that is something else.
It couldn't have been that bad, man, because it was a Toy Story 4.
Well, that's the brilliance of these moments. I'm not going to go into Toy Story 3. Jesus Christ. But yeah, my point being is that, you know, to shift the tone in the way that they did so successfully. But to go back to Dan's point, the fact that it still feels like a Terminator film is just unbelievable. Like, it never feels like it's coming at the cost of what makes a Terminator film. And a big part of that are those action set pieces. And this movie has three of them.
Before you go into the action set, because we're going to talk a lot about those action set pieces, the performance of Linda Hamilton, especially when she's escaping from the mental institute and she first sees Terminator walk through the elevator doors. Oh my God, the change in tone, the shift in her face as she's trying to escape it, and she sees him, the fear, like she can't move, everyone's around her, but all she can do is fixate on this one. It's like she can't even see John Connor at that moment. I love that acting.
She's fantastic in that sequence, because you spent the whole film kind of like, you know, trained to kind of take in this idea that she is so tough at this point, that she is like, you know, she's not afraid of anything. But it's that reminder that no matter how tough she thinks she is, it's like up against the Terminator, like she knows she has no chance. Like, if that is the Terminator in that moment and he's there to kill her, it's like, well, she's dead and that's it. And she knows there's nothing she can do about it.
Also,
but yeah, there's
also a bit of a reaffirmation that this stuff that she's been telling herself and everybody else that's kept her locked away for years has actually come true. And even though it's the sort of thing where I think she knows that day was going to come, there's an element of not only horror and surprise and all of a sudden going to weakness from a position of, even though she was locked away, strength. I think a part of that is just that, oh my God, it's actually happening. And that whole section is possibly my favorite bit of the film. Down to Dr. Silberman's fag drop. And it's just so brilliant as a viewer when you get to realize that, there you go, fuckhead, you were wrong. Here is
I did want more for Dr. Silverman, though. You said about the reaffirmation. I just kind of wanted him to, like, well, fucking get killed or get maimed. Something. Look, you prick, you haven't believed her for ages. You've kept her locked up. You've let this guy go in, this weird guy with Coke bottle glasses, and lick this woman's face I don't know how many times, which is creepy as fuck. And he needed more than a fag drop. Like, honestly,
I thought it was like perfectly pitched. Just that, like, there's nothing better than a cigarette dropping out someone's life. And I feel like I need to say cigarette, because if we've got like American listeners and they're like, "What the hell is a fag drop?" It's like, what the hell's in the director's cut? It has a very different connotations, of course.
Yeah, the cigarette drop is great, but he needed more. The way he wouldn't believe it, the way he just treated her like shit. He needed more. He needed I know he had an arm break. But
I mean, what do you want him to get shot out of a cannon? I don't know.
A bit of maiming from a Terminator is what I want. Like, he needs to see the Terminator. He needs to see the T-1000, and the T-1000 needs to take an arm at least. Just
unnecessarily, just like out of nowhere, he's totally there for like John and Sarah Connor.
It's not unnecessary.
But he decides to just like.
It's not unnecessary because Dr. Silverman is a prick.
But that's based on your emotions. I'm talking from a narrative level. It makes no sense in the film for him to just randomly lop off his arm.
He just thinks he's a copper, so he goes up to him to talk to him, and then he gets... I mean, there was no point for fucking Jeanette Goldstein to stab Xander Berkeley through the milk bottle.
Oh, well, he was just being a nuisance at that point, wasn't he?
So was Dr. Silverman, whatever his name
is. Well, as far as the Terminator is concerned, he's just standing there and doing his fag drop, and that is literally it.
We're going to argue for days.
Yeah, I know.
Go back. Sorry, I cut you off a while back. Go back to your action sequences.
I was just going to say very quickly, I think the wider thing there is he then has to live the rest of his life knowing that the entire previous moment of his professional life up to that, based on Sarah Connor, was an absolute lie, and he was the chucklehead. And you know, he's got to live with his consequences. Anyway,
well, I think it works perfectly, and we've mentioned this when like the brilliance of Spielberg movies is so much of that kind of awe and amazement that he sells. He often does through actors' reactions. Like, rather than showing you something, he'll show you the reaction. And of course, everyone else in that sequence, like you say, the reaction you're getting from Sarah or Linda Hamilton is based on, like you said, that affirmation, oh my God, what I believed is true kind of thing. But it's almost like, it's not just the doctor. What's the doctor's name again? Sorry?
Silverman.
Silverman. It's Silverman with a B.
Yeah. And it's not just, he's not just reacting to the fact that, oh, he was wrong. He's very much acting as the kind of the voice or the of the cinema or the viewer, because you've got to remember back in 1991,
we all know the
sequence,
Terminator's real.
Yeah, no. I'm talking about the CG effects.
Oh, okay.
Because we had never seen anything like that moment where Robert Patrick walks through the bars and you see it kind of mold through his face. Now we take it for granted. In 1991, no one had ever seen anything like that. So he's reacting to seeing something he didn't believe, but he might as well be reacting to the CG that's up on screen. And I think that's legitimately part of the point of his reaction. It's like, oh my God, it's a Terminator. Also, oh my God, we're all seeing something we've never seen before, almost with the idea that if you were smoking a fag, it might drop out of your mouth as well.
Yeah.
So I think there is a plan to that, to be honest.
He also needed to be stabbed. Just FYI.
He really hates the Dr.
I
Silver.
can't stand the prick. But
he's the least of the problems. What about Dougie or Doogie? He's the one you want to get killed. The face licking motherfucker.
Yeah, but he got his comeuppance, mate. He got a fucking... It broke a nose. She fucked him up. She kicked him in the bollocks.
Yeah, but that's great. Like, the people you really want to get comeuppance, get comeuppance. Yeah,
so
I'm happy to leave Dr. Silver.
The people you want to, but I also want somebody else to get his comeuppance. Did he appear in Terminator 3, by the way, Dr. Silver?
Yeah, he's in Terminator 3. He comes up out of the blue. It's so forced. It's the sequence when they go to get Sarah's stashed weapons. They go to a gravesite, and he goes up and see what's the name of the actress? The lead actress in Terminator 3, she was from Romeo and Juliet, Claire Danes.
Claire Danes.
Yeah, Claire Danes. She's sitting in the back of a police truck, and he just comes out of nowhere. And he's like, "Oh, sometimes you see weird things, amazing things," and then the Terminator,
So does he actually believe
walks?
At that point?
Yeah, no, he's convincing himself in that moment that what he saw, he didn't really see. That he went briefly.
So
insane.
he's still a prick.
So he's still a prick, but then, of course, he goes up to her just by chance, and then Arnie walks through a wall carrying Sarah Connor's coffin with all the guns in it, shoots everyone down, and he just runs off. So, yes, he is a dick, but that sequence in particular speaks to the many problems that there are with Terminator 3. But
I've seen it once. I've seen it once.
I rewatched it recently to see it, because I was always of the mindset that it wasn't as bad as people made out. It's got some amazing set pieces, but other than that, it is pretty bad. We talked a few times about getting the tone right with this movie, about kind of making it more lighthearted, but still having that edge. Terminator 3 completely crosses over that line and doesn't quite know where to start.
I love how you give me shit for watching sequels and all that, right? But you're so forgiving with these horrible sequel and remakes. Like Terminator 3, fucking RoboCop 2014. Like, you're so forgiving of these terrible ones, but you give me shit for watching...
Yeah, but you're talking straight to DVD bollocks. Like, you're talking
American
about
Pie
Tremors 4.
I said American Pie 12.
I've never seen
that's a classic Rob film.
I have seen all the Tremors films. I mean, I'll give you that.
Yeah. Well, that I think that's the difference. I'm willing to give kind of like a big budget swing, and I think I've mentioned on previous podcasts. I always find it compelling when you've got so much money pumped into a movie, but it doesn't quite work out. When you see like a crappy straight to DVD movie, it's like, well, they didn't give them much money and they made a bad movie. I don't think there's necessarily anything interesting in that.
Much money. You like to see what they did with it, and every now and then they succeed. You got.
Oh no! I'm sure there is some gold to be mined. And I mean, if any, jokes aside, I really should kind of get the list from you. Which ones are worth it? Because you could probably put together a pretty interesting list of straight to DVD gold at this point. Because you've waded through the shit so that the rest of us don't have to. You're the hero that we didn't know that we needed. You've waded through these hours and hours of absolute bollocks to get those little nuggets of gold that are there, I have no doubt. But
I love how you're making me come across. I promise I do have a life outside of movies.
Oh no! Like I said, I'm being critical. As you pointed out there, I'm the one rewatching Terminator 3. Yeah. You've just moved on to, I wouldn't say greener pastures, other pastures, equally shite. But we've gone in different directions.
Give it all a chance, dude.
Yeah. But to get back, I think my initial point was in regards to, we can talk about there are some kind of weak points to this movie, very much the desert sequence. But in terms of I appreciate there are other action sequences, especially if you include the opening sequence, the future war bit. But really, this movie is kind of cut down into 3, arguably 4 set pieces, cut together with just about enough narrative to get in there. And in terms of those sequences in particular, I'm not sure if any movie of all time, other than, again, maybe Aliens, which is ridiculous that Cameron also directed that comes close to matching this. If you think about the chase through the aqueduct, So, we're talking about from the moment in the hallway, in the wall, all the way through to the chase, to the tire appearing in the T-1000 walking through the fire, which again in 1991 would have been a massive moment. The hospital parking lot, I jumped to the hospital parking lot. The moment that you guys love so much, the sequences in the asylum. So, when the T-1000 shows up and the bit in the lift, they go down into the parking lot and obviously it goes into another chase sequence. The attack on Cyberdyne, which goes all the way through to the highway chase, which arguably goes right through to the molten lava showdown.
I was going to say, you'd include the highway chase as part of the attack on Cyberdyne, would you?
Well,
there's a bit of a lull in between. So
the thing is, you could almost make the argument, I agree with you there, that there is a slight lull. But from the moment that the cops show up at Cyberdyne, that action sequence doesn't end until you're dropping Arnie into the molten lava. Like, it is basically one long, almost 50-minute action sequence, in the same way that the only thing comparable is The Matrix. Other than a few moments of dialogue, from the moment that they say Keanu delivers that famous line, guns, lots of guns, from that moment till literally the end of the movie, it just doesn't stop. They are stitched together, sure, but there is nothing disconnecting one action sequence from another. They just go action, action, action. It all feels like one action sequence. And the same is true of this. From the moment the cops show up at Cyberdyne, it's basically just all guns blazing through to that surprisingly emotional finale. But I'm just not sure if there's any movie which comes close to delivering that much action. And out of those, do you have a preference for which would be your favorite action sequence, or is it very much still the scene in the asylum?
I wouldn't really count that as a big set piece, sort of from a budget, look what we can do point of view. What I would firstly say is, I think the biggest strengths and weaknesses of Terminator 2 are these huge, big dialogueless set pieces, because on the one hand, they're unbelievable. They're almost empty calories of deliciousness, in the sense that you have them the first time and you go, this is brilliant. And you see them a second and a third time and they blow your mind. But I've seen it so many times now that they don't do much apart from be visually impressive. And that, in the long run, those are the things that make you come out of a movie going, oh, I enjoyed the moments at the time. Mm-hmm. But as a whole, it doesn't work quite as well. And firstly, they are all so good and impressive that I'm not in any way trying to sort of pour scorn on them. It's more that I prefer a lot of the bits in between, rather than the actual, like the truck going down the aqueduct or what have you, aqueduct, is absolutely sort of stunning. But once you've seen it so many times, it ceases to impress you, because all of it's got is the visual element. So I think the things that I would say were my favorite were the bits that mostly use the T-1000's it's more of a set piece in terms of the expense it would have cost on the CGI and the cutting edge. Because I think even still for today, it actually still looks good. And just very, very quickly, what you said at the start was, they've got the whole miniatures and the old space war with pink lasers at the start, which is longer than I remember, by the way, when you go back and watch it. That, I on my notes, I know you guys, especially him, I think maybe mentioned that it was a bit of a weak point of the first one. I thought it looked fantastic.
It looks great in this, yeah.
And it doesn't age, and I can watch that fully without going, that's not bad for 30 years ago. I actually watch it and go, that looks fine for today.
Yeah.
All the bits with the T-1000, which I would say everything from him getting shelled in the initial meeting in the mall through to the facility, the hospital facility, those bits I just absolutely love and can watch them again and again. So that's...
To Dan's point, I agree. Like, picking up the action set pieces, as you've watched them over and over again, they kind of lull to the dramatic pieces. But my favorite one is actually the highway chase. Mm-hmm. The highway chase where they're in a SWAT truck and they're being chased by the helicopter. The reason why I love that so much is due to the fact that you got the drama in that. You've got the fear. You've got the emotion that they're trying to... Like, everything they've tried with this dude, they can't get away from it. And it builds up and builds up. So of all of them, that is my favorite part. Like, that's why I would separate that from the attack on Cyberdyne as well.
No, that's fair enough, because you could actually, as mentioned, split that up into 3 back-to-back action set pieces: the escape from Cyberdyne, the highway chase, which I don't think gets enough credit, and maybe it was a bit unfair of me to kind of just lump that in, because in terms of stunt work, like the stuff they do with the helicopter, like flying it under the bridge, and it's absolutely unbelievable. And then, of course, you can make the argument that, we've mentioned there that most of the CG in this film holds up amazingly well. It's almost a miracle. We mentioned when we did the Jurassic Park podcast is that a big part of that is that they're very sparing with their use of the CG. They obviously know the limitation of the technology, so they don't ever push it beyond its means. You know, wherever they can, they're like, oh, well, this needs to be physical effects. And then we're going to just use the CG stuff, or the stuff that basically can't be recreated with physical effects. This is, this is cutting edge. It's the first time we can do this. But there's only a handful of CG shots in the entire movie, and they're all, because they're sporadic and they're, basically they're kind of living within the limitations of technology at the time. It means that they've aged quite well. The only sequence which I think doesn't look great is that amazing set piece you talked about, where you've got the chase on the highway, and then obviously the T-1000 ends up in a massive truck. I love the bit when Arnie
I know where you're going with this.
Yeah. The bonnet, he shoots him. Like, it's a great sequence when he shoots him with the assault rifle, and you get all like the silver stuff, and it makes a great gloopy noise, very rewarding. But then, of course, you have the bit where Arnie has to jump off the truck and do a forward roll.
It's off the liquid nitrogen truck. It is so bad, isn't it? It's like, I've got that on my notes as well. It's like the one bit. It's so rubbish.
Clunky. Yeah.
It's so unnatural in the speed and just everything. It's just hilarious.
It doesn't look right, but it's weird because they get away with it by perhaps having the movie's most impressive physical effects moment immediately after, because you go straight from that dodgy roll directly into the Hasta La Vista Baby, maybe the key moments of the entire film that, certainly back in 1991 would have been the most memorable moment, with Arnie, delivering this, I'll be back, nobody remembers that, it's the Hasta La Vista moment. But when the T-1000's walking towards him, and again, it's like a horror movie, like he just will not stop until he's frozen. Of course, I get annoyed because I'm like, dude, you could just pick him up at this point and throw him in the lava and the movie would be ended. But of course, you want to shoot him because you have that amazing effects moment when he explodes into a million pieces. But it does come off the back of unquestionably the movie's weakest visual moment. Undoubtedly. That forward roll looks like me doing a forward roll in my 40s, that's for sure.
Can we talk about Sarah Connor's luck in both films as well? About when she needs it, she finds a factory with everything she needs to take out a Terminator.
It's not just Sarah Connor, though, is it? It's every Terminator movie, dude. Yeah, everyone find a factory.
You find that factory. Like, you can be in the middle of nowhere. You can be in that desert in Mexico, and all of a sudden, oh, look, there's a smelting plant.
Right next to the liquid nitrogen factory. Brilliant.
It's really, right, honestly. Factories are to Terminator what apparently bottomless pits are to Star Wars. They're just fucking there
everywhere.
Yeah. It is ridiculous that she just keeps popping into these places where, this bizarrely has everything I need to destroy this
highway.
Apparently killing,
They're on a highway, and all of a sudden, like at the end of the the highway just leads to the factory.
It's not in a gated industrial estate. It's literally off a highway into an open, smelting factory.
Jesus Christ! I never thought about that. The highway does end in a fucking factory. Yes. They don't turn off, do they? It's just at the end of the highway.
There would be so many gated bits to get to that.
Well, if nothing else, they would just a turn off is the most important bit. It's like you would have to turn left here to get into the factory. But the way the movie shoots it, it's just at the end of the highway. It's just a factory.
You can imagine the map, can you? The map is just like you follow Route 66, or that's the only fucking highway I know. Like, you follow this, and all of a sudden, just at the end of it, like, you go from Chicago to smelting plant.
Yeah. You're like, wait, I'm trying to get to Utah. It's like, wow, you've gone down the road. This ends here. Wait, the highway ends in the middle of a factory? Like, isn't that a bit insane? It's like, oh yeah, it's pretty fucking crazy, all right, buddy, but it is what it is. What are you going to do? That has taken the edge off that action set piece for me.
Sorry.
Is Sarah Connor having a fever dream? Because it's like they go, oh my God, what we really could do with here is a Terminator 1000 death plant. Oh, sweet. There's one at the end of this road.
Yeah, I'm not buying into that at all. But no, I like you said, every action set piece is fantastic. I mean, I always, again, it's one of those things, as great as those action set pieces are, like, I always think like the chase through the LA aqueduct is possibly my favorite. If you're talking about kind of like from the moments in the hallway all the way through to the tire sequence, I think it's a near perfect action set piece. But because we've seen this movie so many times, it's always like little things that stand out to you now. And one of my favorite sequences in this entire movie is Miles Dyson's death. Like no one has just kind of, the lights have never turned out in such an impressive way. Like, I don't know how much longer I can hold this. But then he has the moment when he's like, they tell him he's going to die on screen. And he's like, oh, I am going to fucking
that breathing is fantastic.
Boom. It's amazing. It's such a great sequence. It was like, oh, dude, this guy is absolute gold.
Yeah. How many takes do you reckon that took? Like, we don't.
I'm hoping just the one.
We don't think you've done enough breath. Just do one more. Just do one more. And then just drop it. Like, honestly, mate, it's like his cum face.
It is hard to kind of differentiate. I mean, narratively, we know it's more likely in that moment he's going to die rather than shoot his load. However, if you were just introduced to that sequence out of the blue, God knows.
Both of them do follow explosions. I'm just saying.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I've never rolled the dice personally.
I think this leads us very, very appropriately on the subject of the aqueduct and funny noises to something that we 100% have to touch on.
I couldn't capture it. I couldn't find it.
Oh,
sorry, mate.
I'll just have to do an impression and explain what this is then. And this is to anybody listening to this. As far as I'm aware, I am the first person, and that's not meant to be a claim because I'm sure others have. I've never seen anybody flag this moment until I mentioned it years ago on Facebook and tag people in it every year because it cracks me up. And that is in the first scene where they're going through the aqueduct. Around the time they start playing "You Could Be Mine" by Guns N' Roses, and the little ginger mullet kid all of a sudden just goes, meh, for no obvious apparent reason.
You've got to think, he's like, is he playing a song on the radio or something? Like, you've got to give him some sort of benefit of the doubt. But yeah, he's literally driving down the road and he's just there, like, the motorbike is making that whiny sound again. So he thinks, I'm going to go, meh.
Yeah. Well, all I could think, because Dan has put this up on Facebook, and it's hard to kind of know, like, once you see it or hear it, you can't unsee or unhear it. So we'll put this up on the website because it is such a bizarre moment. And I was trying to figure out what the fuck this kid is up to because I'd never noticed it until Dan points out. And I thought, well, maybe, every so often in movies, obviously they add the sound effects afterwards. So, you have these kind of moments when they tell, like, oh, they've got to tell Ewan McGregor, stop making lightsaber noises because we'll do that in post. Maybe they were on like a bike and they weren't really riding the bike. Maybe it was on the back of a rig. And he just decided to make a motorbike sound. That's the only thing I could think because it's so weird.
I think like the conceit is there. Like what Rob said is at the time, if you were in the reality rather than watching the movie, I think they're listening to the Guns N' Roses song on the boombox or the ghetto blast or whatever you'd call it back in the day. And I think at some point he just, for whatever reason, he just went, yeah, or something, because the sound effect that comes out of his mouth is definitely done in post. Yeah. But the reason I find it fascinating is because the thought processes could have only gone like this. Firstly, they might have gone, oh, he makes some weird noise, but we can't capture that on film. Let's do it on post. What noise should we choose? How about a meh? Like that is one of the options. Second, and they went, yes, that is exactly right. That is what people hear at this moment. Secondly, that shot must have been really long. Surely they could have just snipped one sec. If they were like, oh no, it looks like he says something, but he doesn't actually say something. They could have snipped it by 2 seconds. Easy peasy. Nobody would have ever noticed. Or thirdly, they could have just not had him doing anything because plenty of people, like, you've got the music on at that point. It's not like you actually need any sort of dialogue or noise. And I don't think anybody would be like, oh, he opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I don't know which one of these scenarios is funnier. All I know is that at some point, many people made the decision to go, this is what we want. And yes, that is what's going out. And it just cracks me up because I've never seen anything like it in other films.
No, it's so weird. And I thought the only other way was that it's like the complete opposite end of that spectrum is that somehow nobody noticed that, like, the noise was maybe just the noise the bike made. That was it, because it was quite a whiny sounding bike, and that he just happened to open his mouth perfectly in time with the whine of the bike, and nobody in post noticed it. That was the only other thought I could come to, was that it's just one of those like weird, perfectly timed accidents. And honestly, it could be the case because, as you say, once you see it and hear it, you just can't believe it's a thing. But you might actually be the first person to ever know, or certainly the first person to document it online. So maybe it's just one of those things everyone misses. And then, you bring it up. And once you see it, you're like, oh, it's just fucking there. It's been hiding in plain sight all these years.
After Dan brought it up, I did watch that twice, actually 3 times last night, just to see. And it's definitely Ginger Mullet guy going, meh. Like, it's definitely him doing it. And
it's done in post as well, because it's not synced perfectly.
The other thing I wanted to mention about Ginger Man. He's getting a bit close to John Connor on that bike, isn't he? No, I appreciate you've got to. I appreciate
where do you want him to go?
Well, I appreciate you've got to hold on or something, but they've usually got the handles at the back or something to hold on to, haven't they? Like he is cupping up a lot. I'm sorry,
dude. I think you are giving 12-year-olds a very hard time. Yeah, it's like, couldn't you look a little bit cooler on the back of that bike? I was like, him hanging on to like John Connor while driving on the back of a motorbike. I'm like, dude, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt.
All he was missing, dude. All he was missing was putting his head on his shoulder. Like that was the only thing he was missing at that point. Was just
if he was like licking the back of his ear and kind of like kissing his neck, maybe I suppose. But yeah.
He's also an impatient little fucker because there's a bit when they're robbing the bank.
And John, like, come on. Yeah.
And John Connor's got like this magical thing that can like empty an ATM quicker than anyone can.
That machine.
And he's like, hurry up, it's taking too long. It's like, it's literally taking 2 seconds. I mean, it's like almost quicker than it would be to like, how much money would you like to take out? £100, put in your pin and stuff like that. But
yeah, it's an absolute miracle of a machine. It's never really explained what this miracle of a machine is. The fact that it can break into banks, it can break into Cyberdyne. But yeah, his little shit friend busting his chops about it. It's like, literally, in Wales, it would take so much. It would take longer because you'd have to pick between English and Welsh. It's like, Jesus Christ, man! Like, how much money do you want, and how quickly do you want it? But that is actually one of we mentioned earlier the fact that few things in this movie like age it. It's oddly ageless beyond the ginger mullet. But that moment and his use of the term "let's book" is very much a 1991 moment. I don't think anyone's used let's book since 1991.
I only figured it out on this viewing because that machine, I always thought like you put the machine in and it reads the numbers and all that shite. But he's actually stolen a credit card and hooked it up to his machine because he says stolen credit card, and I've always missed that. And it's the same when he hooks it up to the machine. Like
Cyberdyne. It's basically. I think the idea is it's like a password, like a digit password hacker.
So it reads the card, it reads the machine, and it finds the pin number, the number that matches. That's right.
It just happens to have a kind of a USB equivalent port that connects with every device.
Every single device.
A bit like an Independence Day, where like conveniently the alien spaceship technology is like compatible with like mini
Mac
players, or like it's like sweet.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. And from like really kind of digging into the weeds to one of the broadest questions I could possibly ask you guys. Do you think this movie is Arnie's finest moment? Because, I mean, we've not really talked about Arnie's performance in this film, which I think is like legitimately fantastic. We talked about like the mechanical nature of not blinking and stuff, but I think his kind of slow humanization in this movie is absolutely fantastic. And from an iconic point of view, despite obviously being in any number of huge movies, I don't think anything quite compares to Terminator. And equally, even within all those Terminator movies, I think when most people think of Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator, they still think of Terminator 2 with like the full leathers, that specific haircut, which kind of came about by accident. I think we mentioned it in the first Terminator film. The kind of flat top haircut came about because he burned his face off. It was very strange. But I think that look of like the head to toe leather, the sunglasses, the bike, the shotgun is maybe the quintessential Arnie moment on screen.
I mean, the best Arnie is obviously Jingle All the Way, especially he had a really good child actor in that, didn't he, with Jake Lloyd?
Well, that is a perfect example of like, how badly things can go with having kids on screen. If you've got at one end of the spectrum, you've got everything James Cameron does with like Newt and John Connor, and at the other end, yes, you've got sadly Jingle All the fucking way.
But no, honestly, if you think of a quintessential Arnie moment, it is him and as Dan has already said, is him walking out of the bar with Bad to the Bone playing. Like that is quintessential Arnie. Now, before Dan answers as well and says if that is if he believes it's the same. When he walks into the bar naked, we mentioned this on Terminator 1 about everyone just keeps having a quick little look down at Arnie's dick in Terminator 1.
He's naked.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. But the men do it as well. They're having a quick look down to see how big it is, see how jealous they get. The women in this, the noises they're making when he's walking through the bar as they're just staring at naked, like they are not looking at his eyes whatsoever.
Well, it's not just, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure they've given him an absolute hammer, but you've got to remember as well that he looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Whatever you might want to say about his face, like Dan mentioned earlier in the podcast, he's not in his Mr. Olympia kind of size, which he was in the first one. This is 7 years later, and he is leaner. There's no two ways about it. He looks something closer to an actual human being than he did in that movie when he was just absolutely ginormous still. But this guy comes in and he is beyond shredded. He's butt naked. You would 100% look him up and down. And I don't care if you're a guy or a girl. If that dude walks into a bar and just out of the blue and he's butt naked, there's no way you're not looking at his junk. You 100% would.
Absolutely. But what I'm saying is you are absolutely. But what I'm saying is from the first one where they just had the little glance, they went beyond, above and beyond in this.
Yeah, they did.
But everyone had to look to the point where I'm sure some women were sliding off their chairs whilst they're actually just staring at.
Well, the pool cues are disappearing left, right.
It brings me to an interesting question because I think you can throw.
I haven't let Dan answer yet. The other question.
Oh, sorry. I do apologize. I'll get to mine.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, is this his best film? I think.
Well, just know his most iconic moments and Arnie at his best.
I think so. And I think it was something that I briefly mentioned in the first one, and that is that Arnie doesn't look like the Terminator as you imagine him that much in the first film, as in the classic leather jacket, sort of dark t-shirt, combats and glasses. And I think so much of that is your imagination of what he should look like is based on the second film because he is so iconic in this film. And I think to have a final word on that is like, if you were trying to describe factually Arnold Schwarzenegger in sort of some book or magazine or something like that, and you were to list his credits after it, you're not going to get, and Arnold Schwarzenegger brackets, Total Recall, Jingle All the Way, Kindergarten Cop, Terminator 2. It would be Arnold Schwarzenegger, Terminator 2, Predator, Total Recall, or something like that. It doesn't really matter. You would put Terminator 2 top billing after his name because his performance in it is fantastic. Like you say, it's not only his humanization, but also one of my favorite scenes, even though I don't want to say it cheapens it, but it's a bit comical. It's the smile scene because
from the director's cut.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was only on the director's cut.
No, I didn't because I think I've always seen that, but I've never always seen the.
No, it's definitely from the director's cut. The smiling sequence. I'm sure
in the best possible way, he does the worst ever smile that is like a inhuman robot doing its best impression of a human. And I love it, even though it is one of those moments that takes you out the darkness of the concept in the film. It's just really funny. And I think I probably used that image as a GIF with loads of repeatedly over the years.
Well, no, he does have a few comedic, and the thing is, it's easy to forget that Arnold Schwarzenegger has always had a gift for comic timing, whatever you might think of him as an actor. Like, he won awards for Twins, for instance. Like, and he's fantastic in that movie. Even he's playing very much the foil rather than, Danny DeVito, maybe perhaps playing the more kind of traditional comedic actor. But he's always been good in comedic roles. And one of the bits that always makes me laugh in this movie, and it's a bit, I think it's because I forget about it because it's a small key role, it's the bit with John Connor in the when he finally gets off the bike. He's like, "Get off me, man!" And those two beefcake guys come over. Like, did you call moi a dipshit? I think John Connor's fantastic in that sequence. But when he's telling Arnie, "You can't kill these people," and he just keeps going, "Why?" And the camera keeps zooming in closer to his face. You just can't. Why? It's just like, I don't know. There's something about that moment where I was just like, it's a moment of levity, and what up until that point has been a pretty dark movie. I said,
like when he says as well, "Don't kill this guy." When they go to rescue Sarah Connor, he shoots him in the knees, and he just looks at John Connor and goes, "He'll live."
Yes, brilliant. I love that. And there's on a sort of similar but not similar level, there's a quote that I've always found that's pretty funny, which is just after it's like, "Hey Janelle, how's Wolfie?" And they go through the whole rigmarole of the fact that his dog's been dead. He doesn't finish his conversation with the T-1000. He just hangs up and he goes, "Your foster parents are dead." Like, he doesn't softball it. It's like, "Well, John, I've got some bad news for you, mate." It's just like, and John's like, "Oh, all right."
Dude, he gets over it so quickly.
Well, he didn't like him in the first place.
I know that they aren't his favorite people, but he's just like, these people he's ostensibly grown up with, or certainly been with for the last couple of years, and he's like, "They're dead," and he's like, "Oh, that's a bit of a bummer, I suppose. On with the rest of my day." I guess he's got a lot on his plate at that point.
Let's go and get my mum. Dude, we've been talking about this film for nearly an hour and 15 minutes. We might have
I've got to say something just quickly here as well. Just on this humanization of him, right? There's a bit when it's like, "What's wrong with your eyes?" That whole sort of...
Oh, yeah, great stuff.
His next line pretty much in the film is, "I have detailed files on human anatomy." 1 second after going, "What is wrong with your eyes?" and a minute before going, "What is a smile?" It's like that's like sort of going, "I've got detailed files on how to build a house." A minute after going, "What is a window?"
Yeah, absolutely is. But that, like, just before we wrap up, that kind of leads in perfectly to the fact that, like, James Cameron, and you find it with a lot of these big movies, is like, how do you end it? You know, sticking the landing. And we've already talked about the fact, despite the role and stuff, the finale to this film is, from an action set piece perspective, is absolutely fantastic. The stuff with like the twin. Sarah Connors, who she actually has a twin, and she was in this movie. There's two sets of twins because there's also the security guy, which was one of the most impressive.
Their names in real life. I don't know their surnames, but their first names are Don and Dan.
Yeah. Oh my god, it might as well be Bill and fucking Ben, mightn't it? But you know, you have that amazing action set piece where the Terminator, and again, how they make it so emotional. The bit where you think Arnold's dead, or the Terminator's dead, when he sticks a Terminator reaching out for a grenade launcher should have no dramatic impact. But because of the way the music swells and you're just so into this character at this point, you're just like, oh, I just so want him to reach this goddamn grenade launcher. And it's only when I stepped away from it, I'm like, this is a ridiculous sequence. But of course, he turns back on, saves the day. Everything's perfect. And it leads to that finale when they drop him into the steel, as he keeps referring to, in molten lava, whatever you want to call it. Again, that sequence shouldn't work. But in terms of like a way to sign off a near perfect movie, I mean, again, you know, a comparison being, I keep using this, Aliens. Like, you know, the finale to that film is just unbelievable. It just keeps going and going, and then somehow manages to have an emotional payoff as well. I mean, Cameron's an absolute master of basically wrapping up huge action movies. But yeah, this is maybe better than any. So in terms of like delivering from the action perspective and then on the character perspective, yeah, absolutely knocks it out of the park. But yes, we do need to move on.
You are talking about Cameron, who, again, to go back to it, seems to put in these Terminator films a factory just at the end of it, just to end the film.
Yeah. He loves a factory. Yeah, loves a factory.
For a factory at the end of this film.
Well, he does love military equipment, doesn't he? Kind of thing. And I know it's not military equipment; it's just like a smelting factory or whatever. But yeah, from a visual perspective, it definitely works. Even if I'm now totally bummed out about the whole fact that it's at the end of a goddamn motorway or a highway. Ridiculous.
I wish at some point they'd have done a sort of alternative ending to see how much they could have ruined the film, where they went reverse back to the future. And as his thumb's going down into the ball of melting steel or whatever, he just also starts to disappear.
Yeah.
As if we saved the day and it all worked. It would have cheapened it to the point of being like a children's movie so much that I think it would have just been to see the fallout.
Well, speaking about ruining the end of a movie, I mean, it depends what version you're watching, because I would argue that the thumb going into the molten lava shouldn't work, but works perfectly. Of course, the theatrical cut works with that on a thematic level, works absolutely perfectly, where you're just seeing the highway and you've got the voiceover by Sarah Connor, and it's just like, yeah, that's the way you wrap up a movie. But if you're watching the director's cut, it cuts to the future, like 2027, I think it's supposed to be. And you get old-ass Sarah Connor, complete with old makeup and stuff, and her just enjoying the future with her grandkids. And obviously John Connor, who works in the Senate now or some bullshit like that. It's fucking horrible. Yeah. It's, you know, most of the stuff from the director's cut, I would argue, doesn't belong in the film. I can see why they've cut it. Some of the narrative stuff works. I actually, despite the fact that I love Michael Biehn, I think the dream sequence is fucking horrible. I'm so glad that they dropped that. I really don't think that works, especially the fact that she's just suddenly wearing like quite sexy lingerie. Like, I'm not sure if I want to see Sarah Connor in sexy lingerie. But yeah, if you want to see two versions of how to end a film and how not to end a film, just look at the director's cut versus the theatrical cut.
You're giving the studio a bit of credit there as well, aren't you? Because they were like, you can't end it like that. Where's the sequels?
Well, that's the good thing about this, is that, you know, he basically painted himself into a bit of a corner.
But they should have ended it like that, dude, because the fucking sequels.
Well, we'll get to that in Legacy. But God, what was the other thing I was going to mention earlier? We're going to sidetrack. Oh, just very quickly before we move on, like, do you see the people in this film? And I'm not talking about John Carpenter. I'm talking about Linda Hamilton and Arnold Schwarzenegger as like these. Like, is it impossible to judge their attractiveness? Do you find, like, because I tried to ask myself, because she's like cut in this movie, like Linda Hamilton, and she's obviously an attractive woman, but I find it impossible to judge her on her attractiveness because she's just she's just Sarah Connor. In the same way, I wonder if people, like, you know, I have no idea if women look at Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator 2, because, you know, he is butt naked, and, you know, obviously the people in the bar are impressed. He's in great shape, but I'm like, do women ever look at him and go, "Oh my God, Arnie's hot," or is he just Arnold Schwarzenegger? Like they're like above that kind of thing.
I've never heard of people talking about Arnie or women talking about Arnie saying I'd jump his bone, so I'm not too sure about that one. And with Linda Hamilton, usually you get the angry women, and you think, oh, the angry sex is going to be fantastic. But when you look at Sarah Connor, Linda Hamilton, you think the angry sex, she's just going to fucking murder me.
It's really a bit too intense. Yeah,
but I also think as well, it also feels like the timeline and all that, she's only ever had, so she might be a bit inexperienced as well. She's only ever had sex once. Statutory rape. Well, she's ended up. But then again, there's the Coke bottle liquor guy. I mean, he might have had his way once.
I think that I've just sort of realised a thing that is maybe slightly profound, but quite important, and that is that, as you were mentioning this, I don't view, like Liam was saying, Linda Hamilton or Sarah Connor, should I say, in this film in any way as a sexual being whatsoever. Largely because I think a lot of that comes from the humanity. And in the first one, she's vulnerable. She's a person. She feels like you can have a conversation with her. In this one, she has almost become a Terminator herself.
Yes.
And like, she is inhumane. She's basically like a machine with one-track mind to escape a facility, to put an end to it. And there's an interesting role reversal between what the T-800 becomes and what she has become. And that is effectively like a human version of a Terminator and completely soulless. Even the way that she treats her son, there's no, hey, thanks for saving me, but don't you do that. It's the other way around, everything first. And there is I've always loved you, John, a small bit of humanity that comes out. But by and large, she is just not a viewing that you think should be viewed in any relationship sense, because she's so cold and mechanical. So I hadn't thought of any of that really until you sort of flagged.
Well, no, I think it kind of started with the Arnie thing, because I think one of the first podcasts we did was Predator. And I think I posted at the time, I was like, I don't think Arnie's ever looked better than in Predator. He just looked like he's in fucking unbelievable shape. He just looks cool as shit. But I just suddenly thought about it. It's just like, I don't think I've ever heard anyone, like, you know, we've mentioned before that Rob's wife and a lot of the girls down in Cardiff, for some reason, find Vin Diesel very attractive, which I can't get my head around. To me, he looks a bit like a potato. But a lot of the girls really find him attractive. I was quite surprised to hear that. But I just, like, I've never heard anyone go, it's like, oh, Arnold Schwarzenegger is my cup of tea. And as I said, then I started looking at it from my perspective, like the Linda Hamilton thing. And I think it's just because the role has become so big, because she's objectively, again, an attractive woman. And it's not me diminishing anything. It's just the fact that it never crossed my mind. And I think it's the same thing with Arnie. Like, people just never think of them almost as real human beings. They're just like these roles, these characters that exist on the screen. So they almost don't exist outside that, I suppose. But sorry, weird place to end before we move on to love and hate, I guess.
Well, or is it? I mean, you never know.
Well, yeah, it depends how this goes. I mean, I'll start then. In terms of love, I'll just tear through these very quickly. I love how the effects have aged. And again, a big part of that being the sparing use of new tech. I think it's really wise. And you see in the movies that come subsequently in the mid-90s when they go a bit too heavy with the CG, those movies have aged horribly. The fact that it led, to the sequels, I can't deal with that. I know that's not this film, but the fact that, you know, the first two films are near perfect and then they lead to, well,
subsequently... Love's mind.
Yeah, you've got three.
Oh, sorry, have I got confused? I do apologize. Oh, my God. Oh, yeah, number two, the successful change in tone. Jesus Christ. Lighter, more, you know, there's more heart to it, but it never feels compromised. And Linda Hamilton's transformation, which I think is absolutely key to making this film work. So, sorry, I started reading the wrong line. My apologies.
Right, so I'll go. So, basically, Arnie and Sarah Connor's fucking Terminator, Arnie and Linda Hamilton's performance. Fuck, I couldn't say your name then.
It's sorry, we're all forgetting how to speak now. It is a Sunday morning. So.
Like, their performance is fantastic in this film. They do absolutely they do such a good job of what they're given. It's great. It's fantastic. Robert Patrick, we haven't mentioned him enough. Robert Patrick is absolutely fantastic in this film.
Hardly at all. He's great.
the way he acts, the way he moves, the way everything he does, he is great in this film. He looks fantastic again. I love Robert Patrick in this film.
Well, a big part of it is the fact that he is literally the exact opposite of Arnie, isn't he? He's the opposite of every way. Instead of big and lumbering and strong, he's sleek, he's fast. He literally looks like an animal. He looks like an animal out on the hunt. And that is his face.
He is the upgrade, isn't he? Like, like the upgrades always come smaller, faster, sleeker.
And he's the Apple version to Arnie's VHS, I suppose.
Yeah, and finally, the visual effects. When Robert Patrick first gets shot, and you got the actual practical effects of him wearing those weird
bullet holes.
ripple metal things, and then when he's lying on the floor, then and you get to the actual special effects where it actually molds and becomes him again. Absolutely looks fantastic. It still holds up today.
Well, that's a perfect example. Like that combination of physical effects and CG is literally in that moment.
Yeah.
Because the bullet holes on his chest, those are physical effects. But when he heals, they combine that with CG rather than going totally CG for that moment. They've obviously decided, okay, well, this looks better in practical. This looks better in CG, or we can only achieve this via the use of CG. And yeah, it sums up that kind of perfect use of computer generated graphics throughout this movie. Yeah. Sorry, Dan.
I am quite disappointed the fact that this isn't laziness on my behalf. I'm going to unfortunately echo everything almost that you said. The first thing on my list was to say I love the performances of three people in this: Sarah, Linda Hamilton, Arnie, but also Robert Patrick, who I think is absolutely fantastic, and it's absolutely testament to him and his performance that he is scarier and more intimidating. Almost an Arnold, a man 3 times his size, was because there is just this absolute. It's not even unhinged, because unhinged indicates almost a degree of sort of emotion. It's actually just the most efficient, ruthless killing machine, and he plays that absolutely perfectly. And even when he's running early in the film after John Connor on his little whiny scooter, it really looks like it doesn't look, it's not sped up. It really looks like he is sprinting, and
he looks rapid.
Well, that's sorry. So going into facts a little bit, that is it. He trained himself so much that he kept catching up to the bike. So James Cameron had to say, "Can you just slow down your running a little bit?"
Incredible, or buy a faster bike, but or they could have just started the bike further ahead. That would have looked even more impressive.
Yeah, but he just kept catching up to the bike. That's insane. They're just catching up to a scrambler. Like,
I mean, I won't add too much more into what you've said as well, because the other guys are fantastic. Secondly, it's also the effects. I love the effects. We've discussed them earlier. You have as well, but just especially the T-1000 one, I think is fantastic. And thirdly, I would say, and this is despite somebody who loves everything about 80s aesthetic and all of that stuff, I do love the fact that almost nothing, apart from Ginger Mullet's Kid, dates this film, despite the fact that it came out in 1991, which is pretty much the 80s. If you look at the music and everything else, there's so much of the stylistic hangover from the 80s was left over. You can watch this, everything down to the haircuts, the style, even the music, the stuff like Guns N' Roses and George Thorogood and the Destroyers and stuff. That music, okay, it came out in the 80s.
Still popular.
Or 91, as actually the Guns N' Roses song would have done. But you know what I mean? There were 80s, there were bands around in the 80s. It's still relevant to this day. And I think the real strength of this film is you could show it to people, and it's not like they're like, oh well, yeah, it would have been good back in the 80s, early 90s or something. And I just think it's brilliant.
I would be really interested, actually, because I was really looking out for those like obvious signs, like what kind of place is this in 1991? And there really is fuck all. Obviously there's the whole thing about there's no mobile phones, which is brilliant, because I think mobile phones are a narrative black hole and the bane of cinema in many respects. But if you somehow showed this to someone who didn't know anything about the movie, didn't know anything about Arnie, and you asked them afterwards, like, when do you think this was made? Like, I wonder, like, I honestly think it could be anything between like 1990 and 2005. I legitimately believe that, because I'm like, they just aren't obvious signs that this is a 90s movie at all. And certainly not, it feels like, as great as Terminator is, there's no escaping the fact that it's an 80s movie. It's got the 80s, kind of embedded in the fibers of its being. But this movie is really, really timeless in a strange way, in a brilliant way.
Yeah, actually, we'll get to the bit on score, but I won't mention this now.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. In terms of hate, Dougie being a wee slimy bastard. I mean, as Rob mentioned, he does get his comeuppance, so that's pretty cool. But just the way he licks Sarah Connor's face just is very, very fucking upsetting. I was going to obviously mention, I did mention it briefly accidentally, is that it led to an array of increasingly shite sequels. But I'm going to skip that because I always kind of sidestep what I actually hated about the movie. So I'm going to say the fact that the Mexico section is quite slow, and especially in the director's cut, it definitely drags on and takes all the speed out of the movie. So that is the weakest element of what is an otherwise fantastic movie. And I really don't like Connor's foster parents. Todd, just for being called Todd, it's just like the fucking lamest name ever. And the fact that they turned Vasquez into a mumsy character, I can't forgive that. I mean, we're talking about Vasquez and then turning into such a lame... I know she kills Todd as the T-1000 in like a proper horror movie moment, but still, what can you do, man?
she's got huge hands. When she sort of puts the spike back and it transitions to that,
Yeah.
it looks like they've used a stunt double of a man with shovels for hands instead. It's crazy.
Like you fucking hell. Vasquez looks like a goddamn linebacker. Some of those mitts, ridiculous.
Was that two?
For me,
That was 3. I was actually 4, so
Oh, no.
my apologies.
Counting.
for me, Dougie as well. Hated Dougie. Such a prick. Dr. Silberman. I hated that he didn't get his comeuppance.
You really hate Dr. Is it Dr. Silverman or Dr. Stilberman?
Silber with a B.
Silver. Oh, well, yeah, I don't like that. Silberman?
Yeah.
It seems unnecessary.
I hated him. And you called me out on it earlier on. So I will say I hated the character of John Connor, not the performance of Edward Furlong.
Fair enough.
The character of John Connor, the whininess of him, and the whole you've got like a hasta la vista baby, and the way he talked in the car, I didn't like it at all.
Love it.
No, not a fan.
I think it's one of we'll get into legacy in a moment, but one of the I guess the most negative elements of legacy for this film is the fact that Ed Furlong, ends up being Ed Furlong. I really think there's all the signs here, considering he hadn't acted before, of him being a legitimately talented actor, and I think he's got all the charisma in the world. And it's just such a shame that he hardly got a chance to kind of really show that up on screen because of all of his personal problems. But sorry there, Dan, I've completely stolen your thunder there.
No worries. I've probably got about 3.5, and again, they're not necessarily hates. First one, what we touched on, and you mentioned there, Liam, as well, is the pacing and the Mexico or desert section. I don't know if it is Mexico. Is it? Because
I think it's supposed to be. It's certainly. It's New Mexico near
it feels like Arizona-ish or something.
Yeah, just because it's very close to Miles Dyson's house, apparently.
So I would probably go Nevada then.
Something like that.
Yeah, and it doesn't make sense that they would actually go over the border with all those guns and stuff. So maybe I just kind of.
I just thought I'd flag that for any listeners going, no, not in Mexico. I don't know if they were, but
I did actually go to look it up, and I couldn't find. I think part of it was shot in Mexico, maybe, but it doesn't make sense that it's actually in Mexico. But let's just say near Mexico then.
It's the assumption because the sort of Spanishy named guy that they're hanging around with.
Well, it does that thing. Even like the color tone changes, the way that every movie shoots Mexico, it just has that vibe to it.
But that was one. The crappy role that we mentioned. The one bit when I go, oh no, that's just happened, and I'm now out of the film. I'm just focusing on a silly solitary bit.
On the role,
I'd almost rather have not seen it at all. And thirdly, and this is just a funny little Easter egg almost. I can't remember how computers worked back then, but Miles Dyson, when they're about to go to Raging Waters or something, he's like, oh, it's kicking my ass. He doesn't save his work, and he shuts down his computer by pressing enter very quickly. And as somebody who works on computers and doesn't want to have his computer shut down by just pressing the enter button once, not a press and hold for 5 minutes, it kills me that. And I can't remember computers in the early 90s going, you know what? I'm just going to shut it down by pressing the enter key once. That kind of gives me the fear. Like, just how would you take a fucking sentence?
It's like A is also the power button, by the way. It's like, what the fuck? How are we going to get anything done? But yeah, he does just press enter. It turns the computer off. It makes zero sense.
But that's like hackers, isn't it? That's like
it's 1991. They're just like, who's got a computer? No one's going to notice. I didn't have a home computer.
That's like 1994's Hackers, where you were able to do so much with a laptop in 1994.
Oh yeah, because they would just rely on the fact that nobody knew how computers work. They're like, oh yeah, they're pretty much magic, so we'll just go with this. But yeah, you've picked out two absolute battles there, Dan. The computer thing is bad, but the role really should have been on everyone's list. And considering that they made subtle changes to the special effects for the 3D release and the director's cut, I really think they could have tidied up that role a little bit.
Yeah, I was just been looking it up. Can I say as well? I know why we keep saying Mexico. Because she plans to go to Mexico with him.
It's on the way, isn't it?
Yeah, she says about escaping to Mexico with him, but then decides to kill Miles Dyson instead. So they were going to go to Mexico.
Fair enough. Is that everything then for Love Hate? So we move on to Legacy. We've talked about a few of these things. Obviously, the fact that it's one of the greatest sequels of all time. I don't think that's I'm not saying it's the greatest, but it's in the conversation. The fact that it's Arnie's defining performance and role, arguably. Again, he's been great in a lot of other movies. He's got a lot of the iconic roles, but I think T2 is still, as Dan put it, is still going to be the first one next to his name. You know, I think it is that defining moment. Yeah, it's hard to escape the increasingly terrible sequels. I mean, Terminator 3, I rewatched it. I will stand by some of the set pieces are fantastic, but they got the tone all wrong. Terminator Salvation starts okay, turns into a stinker. Terminator Genesis is up there with a good day to Die Hard as one of my least favorite sequels of all time. I really do think Genesis is a piece of shit.
Is Genesis the Terminator? Terminator John Connor.
It's
yeah.
Zero Dark 30 in it, isn't it? With all the kind of CGI bits that float up.
Oh, it's the one with Die Hard 5 that had the franchise killer, Jai Courtney.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Which again, I won't go into that because we haven't got enough time. But you know, putting in kind of Jai Courtney has been this totally kind of shredded version of John Connor. Like, Jesus Christ, talk about missing the point. Unbelievable, absolutely unforgivable. And it's a bit of a shame because I actually think that Dark Fate is a pretty decent movie and a decent follow-up to Terminator 2. But one, it was too late in the day because they've already made too many shite sequels, so nobody gave a shit anymore. And the other problem is, as decent as that film is, it reminds you that you really should have stopped at T2 because any movie even closely resembling like a successful Terminator film, all it does is remake the first and second film. Like Terminator Dark Fate is the same thing again. You're on the road, you're running away from a more powerful Terminator with a slightly, it's not a Terminator, it's like a I don't know, half human, half Terminator thing. By that point, it doesn't really matter. It's fundamentally the same movie. So yeah. They really should just leave it alone because, as we mentioned, if you want to watch more Terminator, just watch Terminator 2 again. It's aged beautifully. But yeah, in terms of legacy, obviously there's toys, video games, comics, TV shows. It's literally spawned everything short of its own, breakfast cereal. Although there might have been a breakfast cereal. I mean, I've literally got a Jaws breakfast cereal in the cupboard, so God knows there might be a Terminator one. I went to see a 3D ride in Florida. They made a short movie for Disneyland, and it's still there, or it certainly was when I went there like 10 years ago. It was pretty good, actually. And yeah, I guess maybe its greatest kind of legacy is the fact that it is one of the most cutting edge movies of all time. We talked about it again in regards to Jurassic Park, that there's only a handful of movies in our lifetime which have really moved the needle forward, where you went to the cinema or, watched it at home, as it were, in 1991 and saw something on screen you had never seen before. We so rarely get that now. Back in 1991, there was nothing like Terminator 1. Like that sequence in the hallway in particular, the asylum, when he walks through, it's like, you take that for granted now, and the fact that it looks so good is maybe why you take it for granted. But back in 1991, that was absolutely that was every bit as mind-blowing as seeing dinosaurs up on screen for the first time. So yeah, I think that's the greatest element of its legacy. But yes, score, soundtrack. I only have one word written down for this, and it's Dan. So sorry to put you on the spot here, buddy, but do you have anything for score and soundtrack?
I can touch on this, I suppose, briefly. I don't think there's too much that needs to be said, because by and large, there isn't really. And I suddenly, halfway through watching it, I was like, you might ask me about this. Pay a bit more attention. But there really isn't much. There's more than I remember, a reintroduction of the intro theme from the first one, which I don't like as much because they changed it somewhat, but they made it more they took away the 80s synth style and made it almost like a typical movie score, which personally, that's not as much my thing, but it's definitely for the benefit, I think, of the movie and making it far more timeless. And that bit, I think that the theme is repeated maybe once or twice throughout the movie, but by and large, there is not much score music going over the film. But what it is more memorable for is, I suppose, the two main songs, Bad to the Bone and You Could Be Mine by Guns N' Roses, which to me definitely changed the tone of the film, because in it's a bit weird in horror, suspense, slasher, sci-fi movies if all of a sudden you have music playing over the top of it rather than in the background. So when they go to tech noir and there's 80s music in it, that's different. That's part of the background.
Yeah, that's part of the scene. The mise en scène, whatever you want to call it. Yeah,
as opposed to score. And I think the introduction of those songs definitely does change the tone of the film. But there really isn't much to be said about the soundtrack. I haven't looked into it any further or deeper beyond that.
That's what everyone remembers, those two. Like, and this is back in the 90s when it used to be a big deal. So, Guns N' Roses doing the music for this film was a massive deal, to the point where the music video actually has Arnie in it.
Yeah, but that's
like
Welcome
he goes
to the
into
Jungle.
the show and stuff.
That music video is Welcome to the Jungle, isn't it? Which is really weird.
Oh, maybe it is Welcome to the Jungle.
It's Welcome to the Jungle has Arnie in it, and which is really weird that it's not in this film.
Yeah, that is bizarre. That is bizarre. But speaking of the score rather than the soundtrack, I mean, you mentioned the fact that, you know, it's not like heavily used throughout the movie. But one thing, it's more, I guess, just a sound than anything else. But that, like, the sense of impending doom when the T-1000 shows up, and all you hear is bam, 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 like this relentless sound, like, which is obviously supposed to mirror the fact that he's this relentless creature which is constantly chasing you. And I was so, as soon as you hear that music, like, oh god, it's about to go off now. But yeah, I think when most people think of the soundtrack, they do think of Guns N' Roses, don't they? But it's a bit of a belter. But I'd never thought about the fact that Arnie is in the wrong music video. It's insane.
Yeah, as the Terminator, by the way.
Yeah, totally as the Terminator. Crazy.
And the only I briefly mentioned it. The only other thing, and this is totally for the music nerds, is they changed the rhythm of the intro theme tune, which in the first one, with the whole point of that score was it was almost written to sound like a mechanical heartbeat. And when we hum along, this one goes and it's a different vibe. And we won't get too much into it, but it was an interesting stylistic shift where they simplified it and they took out the mechanical heart element of the first one. And that's just totally for music nerds and anybody that's interested in it. Don't need to go on any further about it than that. So,
well, no, I think it's, you know, it kind of leans into the wider point of, you know, we talked about the tone change and even those subtle music changes. There are an abundance of changes throughout this movie, all subtle, all successful, which are built towards making this a more broadly appealing movie. Because obviously the first film was successful, but it was basically a horror movie. And this movie, you've got to remember, it was given an absolutely gigantic budget. And even though it was a 15, I think James Cameron, you know, he knew, it's like, well, I need more people to see this movie. And he did make the necessary changes to make it a more broadly appealing movie. And one of those is even like those little changes to the score. And as you said, the positive side to it is arguably that it kind of makes the movie even more timeless. So rather than, like you said, we'd probably prefer that more kind of 80s vibe because it's kind of intertwined with our youths. But in terms of just like creating a movie which you can put on 30 years later and nobody knows when it was made, all these little changes make a difference.
Yep.
And it just so happens that, of course, you know, Guns N' Roses are a very 90s, well, late 80s, early 90s band. But the way things have happened is like people are still, like, if somebody's walking around with the Guns N' Roses t-shirt, dude, they sell them in H&M. You know, it's still mega popular. You know, somebody wearing a Guns N' Roses t-shirt in 2022 isn't exactly a deep cut, is it?
Oh, so, they're flying up everywhere at the moment, Guns N' Roses t-shirt. I'm seeing them everywhere. They were in the TV show in, on Netflix at the moment as well.
I'm not watching that. I think it's absolutely terrible. So last one is video games. So
actually, sorry, mate. You said last one. Are you going to let me do facts at any point?
Oh shit, we haven't done facts.
Yeah, I get one job on this, right? You've totally cut me out.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
What?
Sorry, dude. Get out. I am going to steal your thunder. I found out, this is, I guess, a fact. I was always confused as shit by the fact that I was like, is he a T-800 or a T-101? Because they keep referring to him as different names in different movies. I always think, when I think of the classic Terminator, I think of him as being a T-800. Yeah. And supposedly the T-800 and the T-101 is the same thing. So the T-800 is the exoskeleton, the actual Terminator, and the 101 is the physical appearance of the model. So Arnie is the 101 version of the T-800. Yeah. So the T-800 is just the exoskeleton. So the skin on top could be anybody, but the T-101 version is the Arnie version of the T-800. And I just never knew that before. I just was like, what are they different models? But no, it's just a different version of the same model. So there you go. You probably already knew that, but I didn't.
No, I always assumed it was a T-800. So
yeah. Well, it is a T-800, but the T-101, which he refers to, is just basically him saying, that's my face. The 101 is the jacked up Arnie version.
Right, that's facts done.
That's the facts done, yeah. Like you said, chill out, Dick, what?
You're so mean.
So do you actually have any facts?
I got quite a few, yeah, and we're getting close to the end. You realise
he's gonna read every one now. We're gonna have like 60 minutes.
You realise as well, I'm the one editing this. It's just gonna be my show. I'm cutting part of this.
Just all cut out. We listen back. It's just like, oh, this is the Terminator 2 facts program with Rob Westgate for an hour and a half.
I got one job. You get a guest on and you totally forget me.
I'm so sorry, dude. I'm so sorry.
The effect of the T-1000 freezing and breaking up was achieved by filming shots of an amputee fitted with a prosthetic and of Robert Patrick with his real limbs buried underneath the set. Clever editing makes the effect appear almost seamless. I really like that they just brought in an amputee and said, that's how you're going to lose your leg.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that is the thing. Every element of his performance looks convincing, and it are those little things which kind of all go towards making that performance, I guess, from a physical aspect, that is.
For accepting a role in the film, Arnold Schwarzenegger was given a slightly used Gulfstream 3 aeroplane by the producer. Thanks for accepting. Here's an aeroplane.
Here's an old plane. Okay, sure, why not?
A female passerby wandered into the biker bar set thinking it was real. Despite walking past all the location trucks, cameras, and lights, seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger standing in the bar dressed only in boxer shorts, she finally asked what was going on, only for Schwarzenegger to reply that it was male stripper night. Whether it was a coincidence or not, Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines actually steps into a bar during male stripper night.
Yeah. Well, one of the scenes where, again, the comedic tone goes a little bit too far, but if you're going to keep remaking the same film, I guess you've got to do something differently.
Linda Hamilton learned to pick locks for the scene in the mental hospital where she does precisely that with a paperclip, so that was all her.
Oh, cool.
The first film to break 300 million at the international box office. The damaged Terminator look in the climax of the film took 5 hours to apply and an hour to remove.
It looks great. Like, again, the physical effects in that sequence. That's one of the bit where the movie looks a little bit dodgy. You know, we mentioned when we were doing the original Terminator podcast that most of the film actually holds up really well. And it's only the sequence when he takes his eye out and they go like full fake Arnie head where it looks a little bit dodgy. You actually get a little bit of that in this movie. It's in the Cyberdyne sequence when they say, you know, that you got all the guys in the hallway and they're like, drop him, and they all shoot him. But they do it a lot in a much smarter way in this movie, because there are sequences when it's clearly fake Arnie head, when there's bits flying off him, but they cut back and forth between real Arnie and fake Arnie much more quickly, so it's not as kind of, I don't know, awkward a transition, I suppose, as it is in the first movie.
Right, I've only got 3 more now because I realised we're pressed for time and I wasn't allowed to do the fact section anyway. Robert Patrick mimicked the head movements of the American bald eagle for some of his scenes as a T-1000. For the scene where the Terminator tells Sarah Connor about Miles Dyson and the history of Skynet, Arnold Schwarzenegger's lines were taped to the car's windshield. I love that. You just taped it to the windshield and let him read directly off him while you're driving.
Well, he only had 12 lines in the first movie, so obviously this was a big jump up.
Did he read it with his finger? That would have been hilarious.
We were on about the teaser trailer, so I thought this one was quite good. Cameron actually asked Stan Winston to direct the teaser trailer. He did not want the trailer to be just early footage, so with a budget of $150,000, Winston created a trailer that showed a futuristic assembly line churning out copies of Terminators, all of which looked like Arnie. Cameron was pleased with the trailer as he had fears about audience reactions to the trailer showing Schwarzenegger returns as a Terminator after Terminator in the first film was clearly destroyed. The teaser ran over a year in advance of T2's release and was shown before another Schwarzenegger film, Total Recall. So awesome. I thought that was quite good because we were on about like whether or not anyone knew that the new Terminator was the good guy.
Yeah. I guess it's, again, we take it for granted, but explaining the fact that no, it's okay for Arnie to be back despite the fact that he was ostensibly destroyed in the first movie, because we've got a whole kind of line of them. But yeah, I remember the teaser trailer. It ends with that close up of Arnie, but yeah, it's all in the factory. You see all the Terminators and stuff. I just never knew it was directed by Stan Winston. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, $150,000.
Yeah, it's not bad. And you can see it. It looks expensive.
Yeah.
Considering it's just not in the movie. Is that everything?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't want to jump again. I don't want to be a dick. In terms of video games, obviously tons of Terminator-themed video games, but for T2 even, there were plenty. There was the classic Ocean release for UK computers, like there are for all the movies that we cover, you know, Commodore 60, Commodore 64, the Amstrad, all that jazz. There was a Midway arcade game. There was a Game Boy game made by Bit Studios, which I remember. There was a version made for the NES that was later ported to the Master System and the Game Gear by LJN. There was a 16-bit version for the SNES and Mega Drive by Flying Edge and LGN again, respectively. And just, you talk about like a different time, the fact that there was like 12 different versions of the Terminator 2 video game for all these different platforms, and they were all made by different companies. Like, you would just never get that now. It would just be like, well, Ubisoft or something have the right to Terminator, and they make all the games. But back then, it was just like, yeah, we'll give it to 8 different people. So depending on which platform you had it on, you could be playing a completely different video game. But I remember playing the NES game in particular, which had a great biking sequence, and the Game Boy version, which was actually pretty shit. But back in 1991, still felt pretty impressive because you were playing it on a handheld.
Basically. The one I loved, I think it was on Amstrad, maybe, RoboCop versus Terminator.
Yeah. I played that on the Mega Drive. That was really cool. As I said, I mean, you know, there's been plenty of Terminator-themed video games as well, and plenty of offshoots. But like I said, even Terminator 2, there was absolutely tons. But this was, like, as you said, with the budget and stuff and how much this made back in 1991, it was an absolute monster of a movie. I mean, shit, there was a pinball machine and there was even T2 chess for MS-DOS. But, and speaking of legacy, by the way, I just want to call out the absolute fucking absurdity of the fact that they called Train Spotting 2 T2.
Yeah.
Well, go fuck yourself.
Yeah.
That film wasn't even very good.
Putting legacy and video games together, that I think one of the WWE wrestling games had Terminator in there, to the point where they recreated the bar scene for the trailer with all wrestlers as the bikers and Arnie being naked again.
Yeah, well, that's a big thing at the moment in these crossovers, and Mortal Kombat's done it recently as well. The Terminators in Mortal Kombat 11, alongside you actually fight the Terminator versus Rambo versus RoboCop. They're all in Mortal Kombat games now, which is kind of cool. But I just don't like Mortal Kombat games, but whatever. But in terms of what I'd want to see as a Terminator video game now, I suppose. I mean, sadly, there has been a recently released Terminator video game, and there is a sequel to that coming up, or at least a follow-up to Terminator Resistance, but. You know, those games were absolutely bang average, so I'm not holding out much hope for the follow-up. I think they're also doing a RoboCop video game of all things. But in terms of, like, again, we usually talk about a dream video game. I mean, I would love to see one made by Rockstar Games, simply because obviously they're so good at recreating a kind of like, well, I know it's called Los Santos, but they're very good at doing Los Angeles, sorry, in video game format. I was like, how would you make that an interesting open world set in T2? So I was like, basically, I want a future war version where you're playing as a human in this world, or Los Angeles of the future, you know, kind of with Terminators everywhere, and you would have, like, you know, like the star system from Grand Theft Auto. Yep. So obviously you could go around shooting Terminators, but if you do, they just keep sending more and more Terminators until you get to, like, the 5-star equivalent when they start sending in those weird Terminator tanks and flying machines that you see from the start of the film. So yeah, a Rockstar Terminator 2 video game set in a future Los Angeles.
I've got this in my mental notes where it almost not that, but a Rockstar GTA style, you know, open world game, except much like, was it GTA 5, where you can switch between characters. Imagine if you could switch between John Connor, Sarah Connor, and Arnie. So you've got your 3 main protagonists, and what you could have is and you'd have to do, if you wanted to make it a bit more, it might have to be slightly more linear, which would never really works for open world games. But imagine all the things that you could do with, like, driving down, like, you'd have to do it mission based.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So here's the bit you've got to get you've got to break out the facility. Oh, you can swap between characters now. There's the bit where you've got the viaduct, or shooting through the police station. There is tons of scenes in Terminator 2 which you could add on for the purpose of padding out a game. Like, even a bit in Mexico, you could, or not Mexico, the bit we've referred to as Mexico. Imagine that, where all of a sudden a bunch of bandits are trying to, like, come and get your stuff, and you're hiding behind boxes using all your munitions underground to go and shoot everybody. And basically, if you wanted to follow it within the world of Terminator 2, there would definitely be scope for a switch between your 3 characters, nip into a gun shop to buy steal a bunch of things. You could definitely Grand Theft Auto arise out of, I feel.
100%. Yeah, whether it be set in kind of modern day or modern day, the 1991 version, or a kind of future war, I think, they'd be the perfect people, because such a big part of this movie is Los Angeles. Again, you know, I don't think I always kind of pick that, like, you think, oh, well, this is a great Los Angeles movie, or this is a great New York film. I don't think I always pick out Terminator 2 as being necessarily a great Los Angeles film, but when you rewatch it, like, that's exactly what it is. It's a fantastic Los Angeles film. And nobody's better at capturing the kind of the feeling of a city better than Rockstar. So yeah, we'd go that way.
I'd actually go Guerrilla Games version of Horizon Zero Dawn, where you've got the future war or whatever it is, but you are, because they did really well with, like, the machines and stuff in Horizon and things like that, and you've got the future war. You can have your pink lasers in there. You've got all the T1, the T800s and all them, but the way they've done with Horizon Zero Dawn, where you've got the massive machines walking through as well, imagine them as, like, those Amtrak things.
Yeah. The giant, like, kind of almost like vertical tanks that they have at the start of the film.
I think that would be perfect. And in the ruins of LA, like the actual ruins as well, not just little bits of LA, but full-on ruins where you've got the vines growing through LA and things like that.
I think, well, that is if you went that route in particular, because obviously we're kind of moving more away from like Terminator 2 specifically and going more just Terminator, I guess. But if you do go that Terminator route, you've got like the whole timeline thing. You could push it as far into the future as you wanted, so you really could have like, why not have a Terminator story set like 300 years in the future, where like the human race are really just hanging on.
The two, because I don't think I'm going to get my future war in films, my pink lasers and stuff like that. So
no,
I think
perhaps
I
not.
need it in the game, and that's my Terminator would be the game. The future war. That's
a good show. Good show. Well, I think there's 3 pretty decent suggestions there. If anybody wants to take, obviously it won't happen. We'll end up with a totally bang average Terminator video game instead. But in terms of ratings and recommendations, I think a lot of people can see where this is going. Personally, yes, of course. I would recommend this to the few people who haven't seen it. I don't think there's any barrier for entry here, both in terms of whether you've seen the first movie, doesn't matter. Don't get me wrong, I think you should watch the first film, but you don't need to have seen it. And the fact that it's made in 1991, as we've mentioned numerous times, is almost irrelevant because this movie is aged beautifully. So I would have no qualms to suggesting anybody has seen this film. And this really is kind of that top tier list for me, because I'm always amazed at some of the guys in my work at the films they haven't seen. And this is up there with Die Hards, Rockies, Jurassic Park, those movies where I just assume everyone's seen it, but amazingly, some people still haven't seen Terminator 2. So to those people, yes, all the time, like, dude, you have to see Terminator 2. And yes, it is a 5-star movie, despite the fact that it does have that slight lull in Mexico. It's still a 5-star movie for me.
Same for me. It's a 5-star film, and I would and have recommended to others and always will. Mm-hmm. It's absolutely great. It is done so well, even to the part where you got whiny John Connor. But I mean, yeah. But no,
small price to pay for brilliance.
Yeah, it is a great film. It is a great story. The acting, the set pieces, the timing of it, as you say, it kind of lulls in a bit, especially in the director's cut. But it's all done really well. I would always recommend this to others, and it is a 5-star for me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's easier to recommend. I'm sorry, Dan, if you're already going to mention this, but I think we mentioned on the first Terminator film, while we could kind of like and ah over which is the better movie, Terminator 1 and 2, I think we all agree that this one is the easier one to recommend to those like who haven't seen the movie. Terminator 1, you have to go with the fact that it has so many of the 80s trappings. It obviously has that limited budget. There are certain kind of borders you need to get past or walls to kind of jump over. With this, it has none of those. It's so broadly entertaining.
The 3 of us have admitted as well, this was our first foray into a Terminator. We watched this one before we watched the original.
Yeah. I actually watched the first Terminator first. I think. I don't know. I can't
want to go back and re-listen to the original.
No, and honestly, I'm not even sure if I would have been convinced then, because it was around the time, rather than it being like I didn't see them in the cinema because I was too young. I mean, 1991, I would have been 9 years old, and this movie was a 15. But it was based around, we got a VHS at the end of the 80s, early 90s. So I'm not sure if I saw this before if I saw Terminator 1 before Terminator 2 came out. And apologies if I gave you a different story at the last one, but I can't be 100% sure. But it would have been close. But as to, I think I was just already aware of the narrative surrounding them, but God knows. Sorry, Dan, I'll let you get on.
I mean, I'm obviously with you. I'm not on this podcast appearing because I think it's like a 3-star.
That would be the biggest shock. Like, I rewatched it, 3 stars, not a first.
It's obviously a 5-star, and as we've mentioned, it is a heavy recommend, and it's one of the biggest recommends I get. And I think a lot of that is I fully understand that you would have to like that sort of thing to like The Terminator. Mm-hmm. With this, you would have to actually just hate films to get something from this, because like you say, it's got broad appeal. What it successfully does is somehow it's a little bit of a sci-fi film, but only in loose concept. It's not a sci-fi film. It's not a horror film. It's not so scary that it would put people off, but it's enough darkness that it's got enough comic relief that you could appreciate it if you're maybe a little bit younger. And also, it's just got all of the explosions and set pieces and big budget and fun effects and everything you want. And some good catchphrases throughout there as well, which always makes something, for better or for worse, always makes something last a little bit longer.
Yes.
So all in all, it's like you would really have to be I wouldn't say, if somebody would call themselves a film buff or even just casually, yeah, I like films, but they were like, nah, I tried it and I didn't like it, I would be very, very questioning. But
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. The fact that you would almost, to hate this film, you would almost have to hate cinema. And it's weird, like, despite the fact that there is sci-fi here, obviously you can dig as deep as you want to go kind of thing, and there are horror elements. To me, it almost ends up on the kind of extreme end of the kind of Indiana Jones spectrum. Indiana Jones has sci-fi, kind of magical stuff, all sorts of things, but it's ostensibly a family movie. It's just, you just think of it almost as just a movie in its purest form. And this, yes, it pushes things a bit further with some of the violence, but I think it belongs in that same category. It's so broadly entertaining, despite the fact that it has all these odd trappings on the side of it. Again, I think it speaks to just the brilliance of James Cameron, that he's been able to pull that off, that it doesn't feel compromised, despite the fact that it oddly works like a family movie. You tell an 8-year-old, it's like, dude, you've got to watch this. Grandpa hasn't watched it, watch Terminator 2. It doesn't matter. It's that entertaining of a movie. And
it's not as sweary as maybe I just sort of desensitized to that, but my memory of it as a kid was, this isn't something you should be watching. Like, if I think 8-year-old me, or however old I was thinking, I probably shouldn't be watching Terminator 2. But watching it now, it's like, other than the fact there is a couple of gory bits that I could understand would be mildly harrowing for a child, it doesn't feel as, apart from the odd little, chill out dickwad type thing. It's not full of the swearing that my brain watching it at the time.
This would be a 12A now.
Yeah.
I think it's still a 15. I think it was because it was re-released in the cinema for the 3D version. And I think it's still hanging on to the 15 rating. I might be wrong, but I'm sure I looked that up because I was like, I don't know if it is a 12A now, but I think it is still just hanging on to a 15. And I think it's because there are a few uses of the F-bomb. I think that might just be hanging on. And Dan mentioned it earlier. We didn't really go into the scene in any great detail, but the bit when Arnie rips basically the skin off his hand, like, that's still pretty fucked up. Yeah. It's a movie which really kind of walks that very careful line in terms of being, well, this is, a family-friendly, entertaining movie, to being a bit of a horror movie. It's quite bizarre and certainly unique in that regard. But regardless of whatever your views on it, one thing for sure, it is a 5-star film and everyone should share that. I think we can all agree on that. And we have all agreed on that. So, yeah, we have no idea what we're doing next week for the podcast. We'll put that up on Facebook at some time or another.
Yeah. Where's it gone? I have to pause this now.
So yeah, that was Terminator 2 with special guest Dan Goldsworthy. Thanks as always, Dan, for joining us. Hopefully you can join us again relatively soon. I'm sure we can find other movies. Terminator 3. No, Jesus Christ, no more Terminator movies, but I'm sure we can find another movie that you're particularly keen on. I'm sure Terminator 1 and 2 aren't the only movies that you like.
I tell you what, thank you ever so much. I've really enjoyed being on this. I'd say if you ever do one of the original Star Wars trilogies or Demolition Man, I think those would probably be my...
I wasn't expecting that as a combination. If we're ever going to do Star Wars or Demolition Man...
Demolition Man would be an interesting one, because we'll have to get Dave on for that as well. We'll have a 4-way Demolition Man.
I mean, wow, that sounds aggressively homosexual.
Yeah.
There's probably a few more. I was just thinking, obviously, there's no point in having me on if it's something that I don't actually know about or can't offer anything, which I think I probably just, even if it's a small bit, do for the Terminators. And those ones they were just off the cuff things that it's like, I really, really love them. Seen them far too many times. Yeah. But I'm sure we can chat, I won't drag on too long. I'm sure we can chat about that in the future, and I'll put it at your leisure. I certainly don't want to be...
I'm pretty sure. I'm actually liking the idea now of getting Dan and Dave on together for Demolition Man.
No, I think it'd be great, because Demolition Man is a movie we should really do, and I've probably got very different opinions on that movie to you guys. Not that I dislike it, but I do have it. I don't think it's as great as some people suggest. So yeah, Demolition Man, we'll get to that at some point in the future. But in regards to next week, we're going back. I think this is our first 70s movie. I think we're going to Spielberg's. I'm going to get around to it anyway. Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I rewatched part of it recently, and that movie really is fantastic. Don't get me wrong; it looks like a movie of its time, but it has all the hallmarks of an absolute Spielberg classic. So
here's a fun one for you. Never seen it.
You've never seen it? Well, this will be very interesting. We mentioned obviously just a moment ago the fact that there are certain hurdles in the way of potentially enjoying Terminator, because it feels like an 80s film. This feels like a 70s film. It's very much set. It very much feels like a 70s film. So yeah, are you going to be enjoying it? Will you be able to go over the fact that the effects are very much of the time? Who knows? But yes, please do join us next week for Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But for now, thank you very much, Dan, for joining us this week, and thank you for listening to our Terminator 2 podcast. Cheers, everyone. everyone. Bye-bye.
Guys.
So where can people actually find us?
Oh, well, people can actually find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. You can also drop us an email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. We like to read them out on the show, so please feel free to send them in. Any recommendations, just get in touch with us. We do like that. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing.
Cheers, Darry. And a big thank you to Alexander Ortolan for the awesome intro music. He has no media presence as far as I can tell. He's very mysterious, but makes great music. So thank you very much.
And we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Bye. Hey, you guys!